Hello, everybody, to another episode of Ask Ancap. This is our live call-in show, the 19th installment, and today's a very special episode, not only because we've got the StreamYard logo back in the top left corner, because we want to represent our corporate overlords, but actually because we've got two wonderful guest hosts joining us today. You can't see them on screen, but they're both here. Floppa from the YouTube channel Based If True, and Anarcho-Econ from the channel Anarcho-Econ, both of which you can find their channels in the description boxes down below. We're going to have some help from them today answering questions. And if you would like to get your question answered, not only from your normal co-hosts here, but from our two wonderful guest hosts, please click the link in the description below where you can come right into our studio. You'll be put on the air and we can have a nice chat with our even friendlier, I assume, co-hosts. So we're going to get started today. We're going to jump right into some text questions. And once we're answering questions, that'll give you guys an opportunity to meet our two new co-hosts. We want to jump right into it. And hopefully we'll get the opportunity to get some callers before too long. So you guys ready to answer some text questions?
Yeah, sounds good.
Yes, sir. Heck yeah.
Perfect. All right. I'm going to send out the first question here. I'm going to hand it to Zulu to get us started, just so it's easy. And then Zulu, pass it around the table until we're ready for the next question. So our first question is coming in through the Discord server. And just a reminder to everybody, if you don't want to call in to ask your question, you can call in, you can type in our Discord server. So the first question is, if intellectual property were to be enforced properly, things like seeing, breathing, and etc. would need to have owners, but they are obviously dead. Would it be fair to say that the IP, the intellectual property, would then transfer to those who rediscovered it and have the IP flow to the oldest living person at any given moment? So I think this person's asking whether or not intellectual property has some sort of automatic genealogical inheritance. I think that's what the question's asking. Zulu, what's your take on that phrasing?
Yes, I mean, it does get a fair point against IP, namely that, well, if you truly can own an idea, then, can I own the idea of fire? That took some innovation to do. So then everybody's got to pay me dues if they want to cook their food, for instance. And then you can expand this even into things as the questioner does. Like, well, I was the first guy who had the idea to take a step forward, or to move my arm, or to breathe, so on and so forth, which obviously would lead to the death of humanity. Now, I also get this question also gets another problem with IP. Like, let's say we really do take IP seriously. We think that ideas genuinely are property. Well, with any other form of property, it doesn't expire after like however many years. That's entirely arbitrary. If I own a house, I could pass that house down onto my children and their children's children, so on and so forth. Which indeed I've never heard like a good answer from the IP people, which isn't just complete post hoc. Like, well, that would clearly be bad. It's like, yes, it would clearly be bad, but it's already bad to a lesser extent when it does expire. Now, people do try to, pardon me, get around these problems. Like Ayn Rand, she believed in IP. She thought you could patent, you couldn't patent discoveries, but you could patent inventions. I believe those were her words. Now, it's not clear to me where the hell the line between those two things could possibly lie. Because, if I invent a new type of mousetrap, am I not just discovering some very specific fact about reality, that if I arrange the materials in this way, it'll make a better mousetrap? It seems entirely that you're going to have an arbitrary line here. So, yeah, I think the thrust of the question is correct. I suppose what do our guest hosts think of this one?
I can give my opinion. I mean, I think kind of when you treat intellectual property as real property, I think we kind of have to take along with that all of the suppositions that come with real property. So to get it like the second part of the question, like, could you if someone died with an idea in their quote unquote property, and then if someone else rediscovered that idea, would it be theirs? Well, it seems to me that would be some sort of abandoned property. If someone dies with a house and they don't know a single person in the world, no descendants or anything like that, it would probably become some sort of abandoned property. And I think probably the same thing would happen with ideas. But I mean, it does just seem like I'm trying to, contort one idea into the hole that it's not really supposed to belong in. It's like treating something that's not legitimate property as real property and kind of trying to fit it into that hole. So I'm not exactly sure if my answer is completely consistent, but just immediately evaluating it, that's what it seems like it might be to me.
Perfect. I think that was a great answer from both Zulu and Econ. Floppa, why don't you tie this up with a nice, pretty bow for us? Floppa may be currently sailing around the sea. It sounded like a ship's mast adjusting position. So why don't we move on to the next question? Because I think that we maybe actually gave that question all the attention it needed. And we'll start with Floppa on the next question. So the next question is, I think, wow, this is a great question. Floppa, are you with us, Floppa?
Hello? Can you
Hello.
hear me?
No, yes, sir. Everything is good. Just wanted to make
Okay.
sure.
Sorry.
So here's a new question, and this one's for you, based if true. What can we do in our everyday lives to advocate and bring about liberty?
So, wow. Okay, these these are really open ended. So I mean, in general. Okay. Wow.
Try to remember for this question, just take it in terms of, what do you personally think rather than there being like some objectively right answer about how we should approach this. What's
Oh,
what's
okay.
your recommendation?
Okay. Well, I think the enforcement to prevent others to impede on your liberty is pretty important. So I would say like doing the most that you can to make sure that others can't infringe on you, like getting guns or you know at least for your personal property, like just providing any sort of defense or uh, if you do happen to end up in a conflict, that you have a lot of means to prove that you are not the aggressor of that conflict. So getting security cameras and such. Um, that's I guess more or less what I would say on the most personal level of it. Uh, I'm sure I'm sure there's other things you could say, but that's just my immediate reaction to that.
Sure. I think that is something that's actually really important to have a spotlight put on it that people often overlook, which is not only the things that would improve the configuration of society, but things that we should be doing in our everyday lives, even in a state of society, like making sure that our property is adequately surveilled and protected and bordered. And I think to steal some phrasing from Zulu here, that it's we've got objectively ascertainable borders around what we own and what we don't own. Anarcho Econ, what do you think about this question? It's a very open-ended, personal question. I think, what can we do in our everyday lives to advocate and bring about liberty?
I think for me, one thing I'm trying to focus on more is not really shying away from the ideas I have. I live in America, and I'm sure most of you guys are familiar. Pretty much every major developed country in the West is pretty much taken over by a lot of very socialist ideas, and I feel like a lot of that time it can be kind of oppressive to us, where it's like I have these very anti-socialist beliefs, but I'm trying to not be as afraid of professing my beliefs clearly and preaching the radical message, as Zulu would say. So I mean that's about all I really have to say on that.
Perfect. And Zulu, why don't you take a crack at that question? And then we got a wonderful super chat here, and we can go right into the super chat.
Yeah, I think the main thing is to have strategic discipline to whatever degree you are involved in it. Obviously, not everybody can specialize in the task of trying to advocate for liberty. You can be on like a less involved rung, and that's perfectly fine. But you've got to still maintain strategic discipline. That means you're not shying away from the ideas, as Anarcho Econ was saying. You're not, trying to bring down the thinking and couch it in a way that will be more acceptable. You just openly and honestly say, "Yep, this is what I believe. What are you going to do about it?" And you might not have an auditorium to say that to, but you can still gather the remnant within your own personal life, and it'll be even a benefit to you if you do, you know, find those people around you who are like-minded. That's going to be far more enjoyable to spend time talking to them than somebody who despises you and wants you dead.
Perfect. Let's take a quick opportunity here to check out this super chat. So, do you think hiring will be easier in an anarcho-capitalist society, and how can one thrive in such a society? And actually, before we jump into that, I just want to add something onto the end of what Zulu said there for everyone to hear. What Zulu is talking about there, not everyone can specialize into advocating for liberty, is a very important concept. But I think that, like Zulu, for every thousands of people that Zulu reaches with his message, it's all for nothing if the people who are receiving the message aren't manifesting it in their personal lives. And obviously, that means not, violating other people's rights in your own action. But I think it also means advocating to your neighbors and your friends and your family, not necessarily preaching to them, but just um, being an exemplar that there's a better way of living in a society. So I think that there's two prongs of what's important here. So even if you come to the realization that you can't be an advocate of liberty, maybe on the scale that you would have aspired to, it's every bit as important that you are participating in the movement in your own life. So I think it's two sides of the same coin, and each equally necessary. So sorry for the tangent there, Zulu. How should we deal with this super
may I
chat
say
about
one
hiring?
thing?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's one of the awesome things about owning a YouTube channel, and is that you can just from your own bedroom reach so many people. Like I discovered Mintus Wave first, and then I discovered Tax Brass, and then I discovered Zulu, and there's probably one other person I'm forgetting, and they led me to the avenue of reading Hop, Mises, and Rothbard, and Rand, going down that whole rabbit hole. So if it wasn't for you guys having the platform to do it on, I probably wouldn't be in the place I am right now. So it's awesome.
I love to hear it. Well, with all that optimism overflowing, we have no choice now but to possibly say something. Oh, wait, no. It's Ancap. We have another positive thing to say. What do you think about hiring and how hiring will be easier in an anarcho-capitalist society? Well, I'll get us started on this. I just want to say that an anarcho-capitalist society is one where you're going to have the biggest reduction on the scarcity that we're experiencing. And by having such a big reduction in scarcity, you can expect hiring would be a lot easier in some ways and a lot harder in other ways. But overall, you're better off one way or the other. Zulu, why don't you take that and give the people what they really need, some specificity?
Yeah, I mean, really concretely, there are many regulations that are just directly in opposition. Just this directly, I believe it's called triangular intervention, where the employer and the employee, they want to make some sort of a contract here where the employee will do some manner of job for compensation. And then the state just comes in and says, isn't there someone you forgot to ask? Us, right? We don't consent, even though we're not involved in this. All manner of licensing restrictions, minimum wage in its own way is making it so that there's a whole class of jobs that you can't do if you're less productive than the minimum wage. So those people could get hired easier. And also, in general, the society is going to be far, far, far more prosperous. So if you want, you can be far more efficient in your work. Now, this is not to say we shouldn't be biting the implicit premise that sometimes people have that higher employment is necessarily better. Because I'll tell you, we used to have a society where every single man, woman, and child were employed. It was called the Bronze Age. Right? Everybody had to be contributing there. You couldn't have like a slacker. You couldn't have somebody who has time off or anything like that. You're fully employed the whole time, right? It is, in fact, as a society gets more prosperous, it becomes possible for some people to be unemployed for a period of time without dying, in effect, which is exactly what happened. And so that answers the second question there: how to thrive in such a society. Well, you would be far more capable of thriving because everybody would be far more productive because there'd be a much greater capital structure. So everybody's labor would be vastly more productive of values. So everybody thrives far more than the other alternative.
Perfect. And I think this is a really interesting question to hear from you guys too. So, Anarcho, what do you think about this question that we're hearing about concerning what are your expectations for the experience of being in the job market in an anarcho-capitalist society?
Well, personally, I suspect that it's kind of a situation where, if you come into a society or you're born in a society and you want to be productive and you're truly, you're a rational, productive guy and you're trying to be an upstanding citizen, I think it would be incredibly easy for you to find any sort of employment, really. I mean, you could just go to some company and say, I'll work for like $3 an hour if you have no experience. And since there's no minimum wage, I suspect unless you were like, operating some machinery that you can break or something like that, they'd probably let you on just to have an extra hand on board. But I mean, if you're like you're some sort of crook or you're someone who, wants handouts, I mean, I'll bite the bullet that I don't think you'd do very well. I mean, you'd probably do exceedingly bad, actually, and you'd probably be much more comfortable in our modern kind of Western countries. But again, if you're someone who really wants to, pull yourself up from your bootstraps or your something like that, I think you're going to do very well. So yeah.
Great. But I want everyone to know we have some callers in the queue. Very exciting. We're going to get to them right after this. Floppa, what's your take on the forecast of being a job seeker in an Ancap society?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of state apparatuses that, act as artificial barriers to prevent you from doing certain jobs. Like if I want to be a mechanic, technically I would need I think some sort of like license in order to, pass off whatever state regulations would be necessary for your car to drive on the road. So, um, I believe it'd be like there's Zulu talks about like the known and the unknown. So because we've lived in, sort of this modern society with all these laws, it's really I'm just extremely optimistic that there would be so many ways that you could develop some scarce and demonstrable oh sorry, not demonstrable, but demonstrable skill, to provide to your community in whatever way. Like there's probably possibilities out there that we just don't know because of all these I guess barrier like I said, the artificial barriers. I probably could have said that a little better, but that's pretty much my response.
I think it's very exciting to think about all the opportunities that would sort of blossom, not only more of the opportunities that we already know of, but how many new things would exist in a free society with so much less scarcity holding us back. Guys, those are some great answers. We're going to move on to our first call now. This is call number 1, and this is from Soren. So I'm going to bring Soren up and introduce the question that Soren has for us, and I think I'm going to hand it first to Anarcho Econ and then Floppa, and we'll see if we can work around that way. But if the conversation is going a little bit more flowy, then we'll work with that too. Hello, Soren, you're on the air. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Perfect. So as I understand it, your question is, or sort of your challenge is, we title ourselves anarcho-capitalists, but capitalism has an inherent power structure which is incompatible with anarchism. So it's the case that anarcho-capitalism, these things are contradictory to each other. Is that the gist, or would you like to put it in your own words?
Yeah, so if I put it in my own words, I think it'd be better. So anarchism is from what I understand it is a stateless society, a stateless and classless society. And when you introduce capitalism to it, you obviously have two classes: the people who own the means of production and the workers. And in my opinion, you can't just really slap the label of anarchism onto an ideology that doesn't really adhere to it.
Sure. I think that's a fair critique. And I want everyone to know, I think this specific topic where there's tension between libertarians and Marxists in the broadest possible sense, Soren, not necessarily putting you in the Marxist box, but this kind of language we're using, I think that's where the arena it most often comes up. I think for both the Marxist and the libertarian, it's so useful to have these conversations and iron out the way we communicate about it, because there's a lot of semantics here, but there's still a lot of logic too. So it's a great exercise. Anarcho Econ, I think you heard the question. How about you begin for us?
Well, I just generally say that I don't think it's best to understand anarchy as this particular end goal of like oh, we have this society with a state or without a state, and then there's none of these classes or hierarchies. I don't think it's the specific end goal. I think it's more seen as a rejection of legal authoritarianism or a rejection of rulers. But a ruler is best understood as some sort of agent or king imposing some sort of law upon the unconsenting citizens. And I mean, I think if you understand it like that, you'd come to a completely different conclusion. But I mean, indeed, if you understand anarchy to be some sort of, hierarchy-less society, then capitalism is entirely incompatible with that. But I mean, this is going to come down to how we understand what anarchism actually is. And I mean, quite frankly, I'm getting a lot of this from Liquid Zulu, so I think that would probably be the best person to send this question at next, to be honest.
Yeah, you read my mind and you looked at what I was typing down and you took it. God damn you. But yeah, no, so to expand on that, yeah, we don't we're not making claims about like, well, this is the particular type of society we want where it's stateless, classless. And yeah, it is just anarchism just means a rejection of legal authoritarianism. Well, what makes anarcho-capitalist special? Well, we have a particular positive case on top of that. So we know that we're not in favor of legal authoritarianism. That is somebody just decreeing by fiat, this is how we're going to deal with this conflict. Rather, but then on top of that, we have a particular positive case for what we think the law is. Namely, we think it comes from the non-aggression principle. And the other side of that is we also, as anarchists, we don't make any claims about class. Anarchism is not inherently a Marxist position. Class, no class. We don't acknowledge any sort of class structure in the way that Marx would envision.
Perfect. Now, let me just jump in there to say, Floppa, I want you to go next, but I'm going to give Soren, the opportunity to respond, and then we'll go to Floppa next, just so we keep it a little bit balanced. And I want to say thanks so much for Soren for calling in, because it's 4 people talking to one person. There's a little bit of an imbalance there, but I want everyone to know, including Soren, but everyone who's listening, we're completely open to fielding multiple people at a time if they come in as a group. So if you have, we have usually 2 hosts here. If there's 2 of you or 3 of you or 5 of you who want to call in together, we're always open to that. So there's nothing locked in about one person at a time. Of course, the limitation there is we have to be orderly. But as long as we're having an orderly discussion, everyone who's listening, please understand that is totally an option. So Soren, you heard some answers from us about why we feel that concern is perhaps inadequate. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so when I was talking to you yesterday, actually over Discord, you kind of gave me the same response generally, and my response to that was anarchism is an ideology that has had it has a lot of theory behind it, and you can't just kind of take the name of anarchism and give it its own definition and just slap it over your own ideology. That's not really how it works. If you have a society that is moneyless, I can't just call it like communistic capitalism just because it doesn't have money, because you have to fulfill all the criteria for it to be actually capitalist. So I think if you just look at anarchism and say that it's when you have no rulers or when you reject illegal authoritarianism is I think what I got. That's not what anarchists in the past have really described it as. So I think it's kind of you're just giving it a new meaning so that you can slap it on your own ideology, and that's my take.
All right, thanks for the response, Floppa. What's your take on that?
I would. This is an interesting argument. I haven't heard it before, but I think I would more or less say that like political labels are classified by their core principles and not just like appealing to whatever historic tradition there is behind them. Yeah, honestly, I'm just struggling a little to answer, so I'll pass it on to any one of you, just because I would need more time to think about this.
I could field it, because I have looked into the history of anarchism for some of my videos before, and I don't accept the history that we're told by a lot of Marxists normally, that they came up with it. It's their theory. I don't think that actually tracks with the history. The first guy to call himself an anarchist, as far as I'm aware, was Proudhon, and it was
Yep.
fundamentally in what he's saying. Like he was very primitive. I call him a proto-anarchist because he's very primitive in his thinking. He didn't have praxeology or anything of the sort to really round out his legal theory. He wasn't even really much of a jurist. But he was the first guy to call himself an anarchist, and the thrust of what he was saying was, well, he's against rule. He's against crime in general, right? It's like, oh, well, what is property, right? That's his famous essay. What is property? Well, there's property of the one kind where it's like this legitimate thing where it's individuals holding things. Then there's a different type of property where it's the state comes in and takes things from you. We can't have the same term for both things. So he's very clearly pointing at the problem, the exact same problem Murray Rothbard points out in Anatomy of the State. So I am very strongly of the opinion that Murray Rothbard sits squarely within the anarchist tradition, not the Marxist tradition, mind you, where their notion of anarchism is they need a full dictatorship and then the state will wither away. I don't think they get a whole lot of say on what anarchism means, if that's their idea, and if they openly endorse that contradictions can be true. I don't think they get to have the monopoly on what anarchism is, when Murray Rothbard is very cleanly sitting inside this tradition, is a very clean development of some of these early anarchist thinkers.
How's that, Soren? Do you find that to be a satisfactory refutation?
Well, first off, I agree with some of the stuff he said. He said that anarchism isn't inherently Marxist, which is entirely correct. But I do think that it's kind of you mentioned Proudhon, right? And when you look at his ideas, you can see that they're leftist if they're not anarchist. I mean, you can look at the Commune, the Paris Commune, and how they put his ideas into practice and such. But when you mention anarchism, I'm not saying that it's Marxist, right? But it boils down to anarchism and its leftist characteristics, and you kind of just put the leftist characteristics aside and you slap on capitalism onto it and you call it a new ideology, right? That doesn't mean that it's anarchism. Again, going back to my first point, if you take a ideology and you remove some of its main characteristics and you just add characteristics of the opposite ring, quote unquote, to the ideology, I don't think that you can still retain the original name of it.
Well, I'll
also,
jump in.
Sorry. I saw a comment here. He says, ask him to define leftism and how it excludes capitalism. I can do that if you'd like. Like, there's a comment here.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, so leftism, to me at least, is the workers owning the means of production. Very simply put, or not the workers. Sorry, I've kind of fucked that up. It's the social ownership of the means of production.
So I can jump in on that unless somebody else wants to.
Well, let me just say, just for the sake of keeping this, I think, interesting, I want to point out that we're talking about a definition here. It seems still that we're talking about a definition here. So my concern is that as an Ancap, myself, Zulu, and I assume I'm going to give our guest host an opportunity to answer this as well. The possession of the word anarchism is not what's important to us, but rather we're trying to bring about a specific state of affairs, and we're using the word anarchism to refer to that state of affairs. So for us four, and again, guys, not trying to speak for anyone else, so you can disagree when it comes back around to you. But I'm pretty sure that the four of us, anarchism means that we're advocating for a society where nobody has a certain kind of power over another person. And more specifically, we're just saying it's statelessness. So I think, and maybe I'll hand it over to, well, Zulu, I think you said you wanted to jump in, so I'll hand it to you first. We're probably willing to just trade the word anarchy to you if we can get closer to talking about the more important aspect, which is the definition underlying it. That's a stateless society, a society where nobody has a certain kind of power over other people. That's the interjection I wanted to contribute. Zulu, take it away from there.
Yeah, I suppose my main query with this line of questioning is like, okay, well then, like, what is the fundamental thesis of anarchism? If for all the anarcho-capitalists, we've misidentified the fundamental thesis of anarchism, like, is the fundamental thesis some manner of leftist thing? Like, what is it, right? Is leftism fundamental to anarchism, or was Proudhon an anarchist and had some leftist traits, right? Which one is it? Is it fundamental, you know?
So is the mic going to go over to some co-hosts, or am I going to answer this right now?
You can answer that now.
Yeah, so I think fundamentally Proudhon was a leftist, and he had leftist ideas. And when you ask about the fundamentals and such, like, okay, let's go ahead and take it at base value and just say that anarchism fundamentally is just statelessness, or the rejection of authority. But as I say, the devil's in the details. So if you kind of just take the fundamentals and ignore everything else, I don't think you can still put that label on something.
Well, let's say that anarchism was truly fundamentally it's a rejection of the state, right? An endorsement of statelessness. Okay, from the very beginning of anarchism, we know that Proudhon has already identified that the state is just another sort of criminal gang. He didn't do it as cleanly as Meyer Rothbard did, but he did identify that fact. So if he's going to be opposed to the state, well, if we look at the words of the man himself, if anarchism truly does mean statelessness, to be a coherent, consistent anarchist, you'd have to be opposed to the little states, the little state actors who haven't quite been able to form a state yet, the small sovereigns, you might want to call them. You'd have to be opposed to them as well. It's like, okay, well then we're now getting a lot closer to an idea of we're rejecting legal authoritarianism. Because what truly is the justification for all of these sorts of people, right? How do we identify all of them together? It's either they're going to be some sort of natural outlaw, that's a term you can get from Meyer Rothbard, or they're just being legal authoritarians, right? They're saying one rule for me, another for thee, right? They're trying to make up law as they go along. So if you take what Proudhon is saying and apply some precise jurisprudential language to it, that's when you end up getting to the conception of anarchism that I'm holding and presenting here.
Right. So what I understood from that is that, when Proudhon talks about his skepticism of authority and such, you have to kind of realize and accept that it's, inherently kind of leftist. Because when you look at it, what do leftists say? They talk about the bourgeois or the ruling class or whatever, right? And for Proudhon, the state, and for many other anarchists as well, the state is that ruling class that the workers have to eventually overthrow. So I think, at base value, even if you take Proudhon's words and ideologies, it still is kind of leftist. And you can't just, again, I say this a lot, but that's kind of like my main point. You can't really just stick on capitalist labels and such and call it an ideology.
Let's take an opportunity here to hear from our guest hosts who have been very patiently sitting on the sidelines. Anarcho Econ, you're following along here. I'd like to give you the opportunity to jump in if you like.
Yeah, one quick note I'd like to add is I think there might be some sort of conflation going on between anarchy as such and a particular theory of anarchy. Like, I'll see it to you that there have been a lot of very left-leaning people who want like a completely stateless, classless society where everyone's like, sharing everything. But that's a particular theory of anarchy where I don't know exactly what their legal principles would be. They're not as clear as we are with that, but they're subscribing to some sort of particular theory of anarchy, and we just have a different one. So I don't think you can really conflate the category of, again, anarchy as such to a particular theory of anarchy, and that's really what I have to add.
Great. And Floppa, you've been quiet for a little while. Thanks so much again for being patient with us. 4 co-hosts. That's a lot of cooks in the kitchen. Floppa, what are your thoughts so far?
Well, unfortunately, anarcho-econ was pretty much he pretty much stole what I was gonna say. So, I would have to think more. Unfortunately,
Anarcho-econ, we're gonna have a talk later about you violating his intellectual property.
yeah, come on, man.
So
stealing ideas.
Soren and Zulu here, help me out here. I want to see if you feel like this is like I'm giving too much away here, or if maybe on the other hand, if this is just a way that we can get to something deeper. But what if I propose that we just say, okay, we just surrender the word anarchism? What like I heard, I caught in your speech there this suggestion that we don't have an ideology. Now, at first, I was under the impression that what we were talking about was that it's simply inappropriate for us to use this particular label. Of course, everybody who speaks understands that there's labels, and every label corresponds to some concept or definition that's underlying. The label is just sort of like the title we put on it. So we're using anarchism as a word, as a label to refer to this concept. Let's say, okay, you can have the label back. We won't use the word anarchism anymore. But in what sense do you establish by taking away that label from us, because somebody else was using that label for some other purpose first, that we don't have a coherent ideology as a consequence of that? I think you kind of lost me a little bit on that. And Soren, before you explain how you made that jump, I'm just really curious from Zulu quickly. Am I giving away too much? Can we just, for the sake of argument, part with the word anarchy?
So for the sake of this argument, fine. But if it were to be done in general, I would say definitely no. I think we have all the intellectual rights to call ourselves anarcho-capitalists.
Right. If I had to respond, so first, I'm gonna go ahead and say that the claim that I have that anarchism can be capitalist, that's the only claim that I'm presenting here, and I don't have enough knowledge and I haven't read enough about anarcho-capitalism to give my critique of it on a deeper level other than that. And second, I want to say that I'm not saying that anarcho-capitalism isn't an ideology, right? It's obviously an ideology. It has a set of principles and whatnot. But I do believe, and the claim that I'm making here is naming it anarchism is misleading. Very, very simply put, it's misleading. I don't think it is anarchism because of the before mentioned reasons. And I kind of forgot what the co-host said at the beginning, but I think it was something along the lines of oh yeah, just because we had this just because earlier people had this idea of anarchism doesn't mean that we can't have our own meaning of it or whatever. And the thing is, the people that you mentioned were the first people to do anarchism or to give their theories about anarchism. And, if you want to put your own spin or meaning to it, sure, but I don't think you can really call it anarchism if you're going to deny their, ideas and such and just, cherry pick.
I would so very much love to get you to call back in another time on that specific topic, because we have a friend, Zulu and I both know the channel Springtime of Nations. I think you guys would have an absolutely fabulously and fascinating conversation on that topic that I would love to hear. So I think that what the crossroads we're at here, it seems to me that in order for us to really litigate whether or not it's the case that the previous usage of the word anarchism established the proper usage of anarchism as a label. There's two sides to that. There's one, is that even a valid rule to use? And two, even if it's a valid rule, did the people who came before actually use the word the way that you're saying that they did? Zulu seems to resist that. But I don't think that it's in the scope of this show to break out the history books from all four of us, all five of us. So I wonder if we can perhaps condense that just down to a couple of quick questions, and I'll hand it back over to our guest host really, really soon. You have a definition of anarchism and a definition of capitalism. We're not going to fight you on this right now, but would you, just for the sake of facilitating the conversation, would you share your definition of what is the definition of anarchism? What is the definition of capitalism?
Sure thing. Anarchism, in my eyes, is statelessness and classlessness, right? You can define statelessness as not having a centralized state or just no state at all. That's fine. I don't really care. But capitalism is the private ownership of the means of production, very simply put.
Okay.
And when you put those two different definitions together, you can kind of realize where anarcho-capitalism might be an oxymoron.
So a capitalist, I'm not entirely sure what I do confess I find the means of production to be a sort of uselessly vague term, because in society it seems that that's not really how things go. But let's try to work within that framework. So is it the case that a capitalist society, so one where capital, so what you are saying is the means of production is what we would call the produced factors of production, I'm pretty sure, capital, in the Austrian phrasing. So we have a society where the factors of production that are produced, the capital, is owned by individuals rather than by collectives. So can we at least agree that such a society could be stateless? Can we start there?
Yeah, sure thing. We can agree that it can be stateless.
Okay. So I just want to put a pin in that by saying that is what we're trying to communicate. We're trying to say it's a stateless society where people are allowed to own things. Now, I don't want to get into the class thing if we can help it. I'm more so curious about what is the contention that you have that a society in which people are allowed to own things, specifically capital, that's the produced factors of production or the means of production in your language. What is the contention that...
May I ask a question real quick?
Yeah, please.
So this would only become an oxymoron if you believe anarchism is like necessarily anti-private property. Is that what you believe? Am I understanding?
No. So anarchism is classlessness and statelessness, and capitalism is the private ownership of the means of production. So if you try to put these two words together by these two definitions, in capitalism, you have two groups of people. You have two classes. You have people that own stuff, and then you have people that don't own stuff, very simply put. And you can't really, that makes two classes of people in an anarchist society. So now you just have statelessness rather than statelessness and classlessness.
Can I jump in on that real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think somebody was pointing this out in chat earlier as well, which it seems like this definition of anarchism is engaged in package dealing. Namely, you're saying anarchism is classlessness and statelessness. But are these not two separate positions that need to be treated separately? Like there could be the people who are against classes and the people who are against states. The only sense in which it wouldn't be package dealing is if you accept the Marxian worldview, right? That's the only way in which that isn't package dealing, because then being opposed to class divisions is being opposed to state divisions. But if we challenge that very root assumption, well then what does anarchism mean any longer? This is a package deal. We've got to untangle that package. And what are we left with? Well, we reject that there is such a thing as classes in the Marxian sense. So it's going to have something to do with statelessness. And then that's how you get to the modern anarcho-capitalist theory.
So what I'm getting at here is basically you're saying that saying anarchism is stateless and classless is inherently Marxist, right? Or
It's inherently fallacious. You're committing a conceptual fallacy. You can't have two separate things in one bundle, right? Because they've got to be separate. There is a philosophical position out there where somebody is in favor of classes but against states, or it's also possible for somebody to be in favor of states but against classes. If you're Stalin, those are possible positions that we have to be able to account for. So you can't have them all bundled up like this. It neutralizes your rational faculty to have this.
I mean, that would be right if not having a class and not having a state would be having things. When we say classlessness and statelessness, it's the absence of a state and a class. It's not, having,
Again, this
not
is a
having it.
philosophical position, right? So we're trying to denote the philosophical position. So these are positive claims being made by a certain philosophical position called anarchism. And what is it claiming? Two things simultaneously. That doesn't really fly, right? Because anarchism is not a society. Anarchism is an ideology. So we need to understand what the ideology of anarchism is, and they very well might advocate a certain type of society, but we can't confuse and conflate between those two things.
I mean, yeah, I agree with you there, but anarchism advocates for, in my definition and from what I understand, it advocates for a classless and stateless society. So you can't really, put
Right,
those
and I'm saying
two.
that's an invalid definition.
Okay, then if you have it as classlessness and statelessness, then how would that not apply to society?
I don't understand the question. I'm saying this
You
is
know,
an
you're
invalid definition, right? This
yeah.
is not how concepts are defined.
I just don't really understand where you're coming from, because your claim is that you can't have statelessness and classlessness in a bundle.
Let me try and get another example of a package deal. Maybe somebody else in the call can think of one before I can Google it.
I could come up with one. I mean, so you wouldn't package under the concept of running, moving really fast with your legs, and wearing a silly hat, right? These are two distinct, isolated things, and you can't put them together. You have to isolate separate things. And to the extent that you're putting them together, you're undermining the very purpose of definitions, right? Definitions are supposed to point at a concept, not like 20 different concepts all put together in like a little bundle.
Yeah, but a political ideology isn't just a concept. It is most of the time multiple concepts put into one term.
I mean, I think in this kind of case, it's like we're looking for a definition of anarchism. I think, like we're saying, I don't think anarchism is a particular political system, right? It's not like, oh, this society is anarchist because they have 11 bureaucrats and, 12 county houses and whatnot. It's like it's a concept, really. And that's why we're talking about this on the conceptual level, at least from my perspective.
I don't really understand where you guys are coming from, because you're acting like classlessness and statelessness can't be in the same bundle. You know what I mean? And that's
Well,
what
let's recognize that there's somewhat this is a somewhat I don't know, inaccessible philosophical approach. I'll acknowledge that. I can understand why that's not necessarily palatable at your first serving, I guess. So let's just see, because what I really don't want to have happen, I want to be straightforward with this. I don't want people to walk away from this conversation thinking that we just have two groups that are refusing to give up ownership of a label. I think it matters so little about what the label is. We're very straightforward about what we're advocating for. We're telling you that we're advocating for statelessness and a lack of people having power over each other. Now, I had one comment that came up there that I thought was really good about this. So instead of arguing about which I don't want my co-hosts to think that I think that there's anything wrong with the approach they're taking. I do want my co-hosts to know I think they're right. But what could be more important, I think, than that is I don't want people to come away from this just thinking that two different sides refuse to give up ownership of a word. Here's a question I want to move the dialogue onto away from the label if we can. And I think that our commenter, Ali Burke, summarized it really well. Our society is completely incompatible. You cannot reconcile our society, at least the way that we're prescribing it, with people having inappropriate power over each other. So you have this concern that you're fixated on about classlessness. Let's give you that. Why should we care about that? We have a society where anyone can become a capitalist. Why would we have a problem there? Does that make sense? So why is it even worth focusing on class, Soren, if our society basically gets rid of those problems?
Yeah, so the thing is, in an anarcho-capitalist society, as you just mentioned, you only get rid of the authority aspect, and not the classlessness. And my thing is, I'm not really here to debate that if like, oh yeah, in an anarcho-capitalist society, you can't have statelessness and privatization of the means of production or private property. That's not what I'm saying here. My entire argument here is that anarchism is statelessness and classlessness, and you cannot apply that to capitalism.
Can
And
you? Okay,
you
let's. So I won't force you to talk about anything else. Then your only purpose, by your own definition, is you just don't like that we're using the word anarchy. Now, would you give me something concrete, like a concrete, specific reason? I have a feeling that Zulu answered this already, but just a concrete, specific reason why we can't. And so, just to be clear, saying that somebody else used it before us is not a concrete, specific reason. So, what is it like? What are you pointing to that establishes that there is one definition of anarchy? That's what it is, and what we're doing is irreconcilable with that, and we should stop immediately.
My argument is that the founders and the theorists of the initial theorists of the anarchist ideology advocated that anarchism is stateless and classless, and you can't really apply capitalism to that.
Okay, well, we're using the word now.
Okay, you can use the word all you want. It still doesn't make you anarchist. You can.
It doesn't. We aren't concerned with establishing classlessness. Can I just really quickly? I don't want to speak for other guys. So, Anarcho-Econ and Floppa, are you guys concerned with classlessness? I don't want to speak for you guys.
No.
No.
Zulu?
Not particularly. I don't care about making happy the dozen or so leftist anarchists out there.
All right, so there you have it. So we don't care about that. So you're telling us we can't be anarchists because our anarchy still has classes. We don't care. We're still calling it that. Is there anything else you'd like to say about that?
No, that's it, really.
All right. Thanks so much for telling us about the uses of the word anarchism. It's been very interesting. If you'd like to call back in, I can see about getting our historian friend, and that is the Springtime of Nations channel, Adrian. He could come in and he could talk to you at length about that. I'm sure you'd have a really grand time. But I think that exhausts our interest in discussing the history, unless, of course, either of my guest hosts have anything additional they'd like to say before our guest takes off.
I think that about wraps it up for me.
We love you. Come back.
All right. I will actually wanted to leave a final note here. Next time I'll call back, I'll actually have read quote unquote anarcho-capitalist theory, and I want to tackle the ideology at its core instead of just getting stuck up on definitions.
Yes,
I apologize if that's I wasn't being sarcastic at all. I actually really enjoy the engagement, so thank you.
No, yeah, I get that too. I kind of wanted to come on here to start giving leftists a better reputation, because Ask Ancap, the host here, is in a leftist Discord server, and they just ping him to be clowns and to just ruin our reputation, in my opinion. And he said, if you have the balls, you could come up on the show and talk about it. And I was like, okay, I'll do that.
Well, you're certainly far more reasonable than a lot of leftists I've met, so that's awesome.
Yeah, I think that I can only express so much how much respect I have for people who engage, and Soren, I am genuinely, I speak for everybody here, we are very grateful to have you. If you'd like, we're sort of veering off now, but if you'd like to have a final word on the topic you called in about, we can give you the final word, and we'll move on to our next caller.
My final word is just my initial claim. I don't think anarchism I don't think you can apply capitalism to anarchism. That's about it. at a definitionally, you can't do that.
All right, fair enough. Well, we appreciate the input on that topic. I'm looking forward to getting the chance. If you do want to talk about that again, by the way, totally open to it. But just give me a heads up, and we'll get the appropriate people on as co-hosts, and we can get some a little bit deeper into it.
Yeah, all right, will do.
Super. All right, have a good rest of the day.
Yeah, you too, man.
I will say for the audience at home, and perhaps our caller here, this isn't a rebuttal or anything, but Springtime of Nations, the channel Galazar's referencing there with Adrian Shepard on it, they have a video on why anarcho-capitalists are in fact anarchists, and they go into the history of that, some of the stuff I'm referencing here. So if you're interested in seeing that,
which is why they would be such a fantastic duo to have on here, and I don't think it'd be too hard to arrange that. So I'm going to drop Soren out now. We're going to move on to our next caller. That's going to take me 2 seconds. My two co-hosts, if you guys, I don't normally do this, but since we have guest hosts, if you guys want to just have a quick post-mortem while I set up the next call.
Sure. So yeah, what did you guys think of that? I think the package deal objection, along with the historical objections, pretty much wrap it up. In addition to the fact that, you know, we're just out competing the communist anarchists every single day. Nobody takes them seriously. Nobody cares. So if we're not right now, we will be in a couple hundred years when there's none of them left.
Yeah, I don't think it's really. I don't think he really was able to establish the statelessness and classlessness part. I think classlessness kind of thing just seems to be tacked on to me. It's so yeah, it's about all I have to say. That I think just went pretty well.
Yeah, I think history is one of my weaker suits, so I couldn't say anything meaningful regarding that. But I wish he dove more into like classes in general and what that meant, because I
can perhaps paint a picture there.
Okay.
For the people who haven't studied Marxist-Leninism or Marxism-Leninism, because it's a doozy. Basically, when they're saying they want classlessness, what they mean is that they want a violent revolution of the proletariat against the bourgeoisie, kill all the bourgeoisie, and then eventually the state will wither away and we'll be in a world where contradictions are true. That is the literal meaning. When they say classlessness, you should hear, we think contradictions are true, and in the society, the classless society, contradictions are true, and everybody will understand why contradictions are true. That's their literal claim. If you don't believe me, go study what they actually say. Leonard Peikoff has a great lecture series on the history of modern philosophy. You can find it online, where he has entire, I think maybe multiple even lectures on Marxism.
What is their like limiting principle when it comes to how they define the bourgeois?
So it's basically people who have Aristotelian logic. That is the most fundamental limit you can get. They'll have all sorts of stuff. It's like, oh, they're the capitalists. They're the ones who own the capital. But you can even be like petit bourgeoisie, right? They would say, you know, anybody, even if you are a worker, if you're operating on Aristotelian logic, namely the laws of logic we all know and love, that contradictions are false, the law of excluded middle, law of identity, that type of thing, then you're using bourgeois logic. This is where Mises adopts the term polylogism. That is multiple logics. They think the different classes, what really distinguishes them is that we have different logics. So we could never be ever convinced of communism. I tried to bring this up with in the Haz al-Din debate, I believe. It is not possible for us, from their own perspective, they could never rationally convince us of communism, because we have to have proletarian logic, and then we'll already be communists. So that's why there has to be violent revolution on the communist thesis. There has to be, because they can't convince the bourgeoisie to stop doing these things. No amount of convincing could ever work, because they have proletarian logic, where they understand how contradictions can be true. That is the gist of what's going on here.
Now, if I can jump in really quickly, I want to point out that what Zulu is saying here is highly contested by our socialist friends. But the problem I've been having is that over the last couple of months, I've been spending a lot of time going into socialist and communist communities and asking for, because I'm very curious about this topic myself. And because I think for most people, hearing that somebody believes that contradictions can be true is startling. So I wanted to get to the bottom of this. I've honestly, no offense to Zulu, but I've thought to myself, that is so absurd. It must be an oversimplification. I want to get to the bottom of this. So in the last couple of months, and this is just personal testimony here, but I have been in quite a few of these servers, and they've all told me the same thing. And it's two parts. The first thing they tell me is, no, we don't believe contradictions can be true. But also, the only way that you could ever understand what it actually means is you would have to be a Hegelian fully. So I have to completely be. Now, I wish that this weren't the case because I'd rather just understand. But if you're watching this right now and what I'm saying is driving you up the wall, please feel free. I would like to have a segment on the show where we just have a presentation, maybe 10 minutes or something, or maybe even 5 minutes, whatever it takes, of a Hegelian who's going to explain to us why this description that Zulu's giving. Because you must understand that from our point of view, if the counter argument that we're receiving is you have to already be converted to our side, and then you can understand, that's going to cause some strife. Now, I absolutely adore the chat we're having, but we're all the way, our queue is actually overfull. We've never had it before. We can't have any more callers in the queue, so we got to move on to the next call. I hope I'm not stifling anything too exhilarating. Our next caller comes from...
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Go for it.
I was just going to say, may I say just one last thing?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, someone in Zulu's Discord actually mentioned that there's a deterministic, nature to it, which I just found really interesting. I never thought about that before. But yeah, that's it.
Excellent. Okay, so we have got our next guest here. This is Inti on the topic of the wills of dead people. Inti, you're on the air. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Thanks for having me.
Perfect. So, as I understood your question, it has to do with why do we take the wills, like, for example, if you've got the last will and testament of a dead person, why in an anarcho-capitalist society are we taking that into consideration? Since they're dead, they should no longer be having property rights. Let's go right to Floppa on that one.
So this is actually interesting. I read about this recently in like one of Liquid Zulu's courses. Like he covered it, but I would actually like to hear what you guys think first, specifically about, I guess it would be more focused on like a contract, right? Like, are you saying that the contract would no longer be legitimate just because they're dead now, and that their will can't be, I guess, exercised anymore?
Yeah, kind of. My contention with it is a bit, if you imagine someone has a house and then he dies and leaves his son in his will, his house. And then in his will, it says, upon my death, I want my house to be painted red. So why do we have to paint the house red now? Does the son have to do this?
Well,
why do we have to take this into account?
Well, I think there would be some transfer of title of the house to some individual that individual must abide by contractually to paint the house red, I guess, in this instance. So it wouldn't be just him alone enforcing this. It would, he is already established that there would be a contract that someone else would have to, enforce.
What do you think, Anarcho Econ?
I mean, it seems to me that this is a situation where it's like the contract is saying, upon the event of my death, then this particular property transfers over to this person. And I mean, in this case where it's like, on the event of my death, I want my house to be painted red by my son. I mean, I don't think this is a transfer of any property. So it's just I want you to do this, and the son could if the house was his, maybe another clause of the will was that the house transferred to the son's property. then he could, fulfill his father's wishes. But I don't think there's any legal obligation to follow through with that. Or I mean, maybe they could write the contract such that it's like upon the event of my death, I want this house to transfer to my son if he paints it red or something like that. Maybe you could reword it so it's a little less you could maybe find some problems with that, but I think you kind of get the gist of what I'm saying.
Absolutely.
that's
And
great.
Zulu is about to hit the ball out of the park with this one. I know he is. This one's teed up perfectly for him. So I got to get a word in edgewise first. So basically, I think that that's all very well and good. I think the most utility you can get about this is just to understand that there's a little bit of nuance about what a contract is. A contract is a transfer of the title of ownership of something. And so if we think about it, you can at any point you can just give somebody something that you own while you're alive. There's nothing particularly controversial, as far as I can tell, with the idea that while you're alive, you can set the condition that upon your death, something else becomes somebody else's property. The only reason there's complication here is you can't leave in your will that any other person has to do anything. You don't have ownership over your son's body. You could say something like, and I believe that this is what our two co-hosts insinuated as well, but you could leave perhaps a condition that says, if my son will paint the house, he can have it. And in order for that to be valid, there has to be other stipulations. So if he doesn't paint it, then some other thing has to be specified. Zulu, why don't you put a bow on this one for us?
Sure. So let's think back to like the first principles of how does a trade occur, because it's not immediately obvious, right? That because I own an apple, that I can then transfer title of that apple over to Galazar. How do we establish that from our first principles of the NEP? So we don't just have, we believe in the NEP and trade, because that doesn't fly. We're not going to do that type of thing, because that's completely non-fundamental. So how do we get this? Well, it is a simultaneous abandonment and homesteading of the thing. So me and Galazar can coordinate on, hey, I'm gonna abandon this, and at the moment of abandonment, you pick it up, and it's yours now, right? It doesn't have to be literal, like he's got to grab onto it the second I let go of it or anything like that, because it's simultaneous, right? It's a simultaneous abandonment and homesteading. And by the way, this is why you can't sell your body, because you can't alienate your body in the first place. So you can't abandon your body, and so somebody else can't then homestead it. Now, from this basic sort of realization about trade, this is how we build up our theory of contracts, called the title transfer theory of contracts. Now, it seems very clear to me that in fact, upon somebody's death, all of their property becomes abandoned. That fits our first little criterion there. Okay, so now we're cooking. So could we then, before we die, coordinate with other people in order, hey, at this point of abandonment, it becomes yours, and we'll shake on that, and then we can have exchange with the condition being at the moment of death. That seems to me how you would work around wills. So it's not that the currently dead guy, we need to respect his dead will, because of course he doesn't have a will when he's dead. It's that we have to respect his last will, right? That's the key. That's why it's called a last will and testament. What was his last will? Well, he already pre-organized it. That's pointing to pre-organization. Well, we in fact know what he pre-arranged to happen, and so we know what he wanted to happen at that moment of abandonment. So then we can have it transfer over. And I think that pretty much solves the case of last will and testament. So long as they're title transfer compatible, then they can be done with a condition being, upon my death, this property transfers so and so.
Well, there you have it, Inti. You got the full cornucopia of Ancap perspective on the last will and testament. Do you feel that your question has been answered, or is there something that's still not quite right from your point of view?
Zulu, you said title transfer is simultaneous abandonment and homesteading, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I think the abandonment part is quite clear. About the homesteading, the homesteading would then have to happen at point of death, right? But couldn't it be the case that, I don't know, the son is miles away from his father's house? So how does this homesteading really work? Is it just the intent of the son to homestead it later?
This is what is interesting about this, because normally if I'm homesteading something out in nature, right, I would have to erect some sort of barrier around it so everybody can see that this thing is owned. They might not necessarily know who owns it, but they know that it is owned by somebody. Now, with exchanged goods, that barrier is necessarily already in place. So you don't actually have to do the erecting of the barrier. That's the key distinction. That's why if I were to give my apple to Galzar, I don't have to literally like hold it out in my hand and he grabs it in his hand and then I like let go and then he has it. I can just put it down on the counter and say, hey Galzar, here's that apple you wanted. It's yours now. Because doing it by proxy like that works in this case because it already has that objective border around it that everybody can ascertain.
It's certainly not the case that if Zulu left the apple on the counter, that Floppa could justifiably come eat it right quick before I had gotten the opportunity to pick it up.
But I'm hungry. Just kidding.
So would I be too if we were roommates. By the
No, I know.
So Inti, does that take care of your concern?
Yeah, pretty much. Thanks.
Excellent. All right. Well, that was a nice, straightforward question. We appreciate it so much. Did you have another question on that topic, or would you like the last word?
I think maybe one thing, can there be in the will a clause where it says title will only transfer 1 day after my death? And if so, what happens to the house or the land or whatever during this period? Is it unowned, and could someone then in the meantime homestead it, and who would then be the true owner 1 day later?
So I don't think that you could do that based on my analysis of wills here. You'd have to have it in like escrow if you wanted that to happen. It's like, okay, well, it transfers to like some sort of escrow arrangement with my lawyer, and then after the day, then it transfers. Like sometimes people set this up with like trust funds and whatnot. Like you could have an escrow management if you really wanted to get that thing to happen. But you couldn't just have a bare bones contract, say, and 3 days after my death, then it transfers from me to my son. Because like, well, you don't exist any longer to do the transferring at that point.
Okay, thanks.
Perfect. All right. You may have the last word before we move on to our next caller.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for enlightening me, and do what you guys are doing. Keep on doing it.
Thank you so much. We appreciated the call, and please feel free to call back in any other time if you got more that you'd like to talk about. It was a pleasant having you. All right, there we are. That's our second call out of the way, a nice and easy one. By the way, if anyone's listening, when you're done on the line, I'm kicking you because we've got a full call queue. It's not personal. I don't want anyone to think that it is. We've got our next caller coming up now. This is Kaorix. Kaorix, you're on the line. You've got a really interesting question. Would you like to share your question with us first, and then I will hand the call around, and you can get some answers?
Yes. Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Right. So we're going from one question about history to a question about dead people, and now I'm going to talk about the dead people of history. And specifically, I want to talk about it a little bit. I hope my voice doesn't break too much because this topic gets me a bit emotional. But for context, and as you can probably hear, I am a French person, and I've lived 30 years in the country with a very rich culture and history that has a lot of good, I think, and a lot of bad. And recently, I feel like I'm kind of walking into a field of ashes of people that reject that past, and it's causing me a bit of distress, I think. As I said, I mourn kind of the loss of the roots and the memory of the culture and the craftsmanship and the traditions that we have. So I have two related questions, I would say. One is, do you think that this love of the past and this love of one's country and what's good in history is inherently anti-libertarian when, obviously this is a country and it is therefore always full of evil and socialism and collectivism? And two, this is probably a bit broader, but do you think there's any hope for, I ask about the French because it's obviously more personal to me, but Zulu is British. Do you think there is any hope for other European cultures or even cultures outside of Europe to become more libertarian and more respectful of law over time?
So if I may, I could. Sorry, I just wanted to jump in just real quick and say that it's definitely not anti-libertarian to have a love for the virtues of your ancestors that brought a society to where it is. There's definitely a lot of virtues that have to go in to making a prominent and prosperous society. So that's not anti-libertarian. You can compartmentalize. You can go, well, bad things did happen at various points, but that doesn't mean we write off the whole ordeal. That doesn't mean that the men who build great works of art and buildings and so on and so forth, that doesn't mean that they don't have virtue any longer, because even if they were in themselves a mixed bag.
Yeah, I would like to just say that as someone who loves a lot of the aspects of America, obviously, yeah, I think a lot of people conflate the state and the virtues that the people within the state hold. So I think it's completely reasonable to say that, like, I love my language, I love the architecture, the craftsmanship that's been produced within the country, and the thinkers and philosophers of that country, obviously depending on the virtues they held. But yeah, I think there's a little conflation going on there, and I had something else to say, but I forgot, so I'll pass it on to Anarcho-Econ.
Yeah, I mean, from what I heard from Zulu and Falapa, pretty much just what I have to say. I mean, I don't think we should be conflating culture with, loving the state, a certain type of food and a certain type of dance, right? We need to separate these different aspects of a certain I guess national identity or something, and then we can evaluate these with our libertarian principles. So you can certainly be a consistent libertarian while loving a French dance and croissants, but you can't be a libertarian while loving the state and advocating for more government. So I think generally just separate out the specific aspects of a certain, I guess, culture that don't contradict libertarianism, but you can certainly feel pride in those other aspects that aren't contradictory to libertarianism. And I assure you that most of them probably are, like food, dance, festivals, whatnot like that.
And I think it is worth pointing out, not to I have cut off Galazar there, unfortunately, but you're getting me thinking there. And in fact, if you truly do have a love for, like, the virtues in a society, the virtuous men who did great things, then that in fact requires a hatred of the state, because the state is the very thing that is trampling that and trying to destroy those people and those virtues. So I think it's not just that you can consistently love a people but hate the state. If you truly do love those people, then you have to hate the state that is trying to destroy that culture.
Yes, that's a perfect launch pad for me. I was actually hoping I was going to try to respond less and leave it to our co-host, but I can't help it. This is such a beautiful, tragic but beautiful question. Beautiful, at least for my purposes, because it is so directly to the core of what's important to us. So I'm going to relay a little bit of a personal story here to everybody. Where I live has been totally demographically annihilated over the course of just 1 or 2 generations. So I think that it's probably not controversial in this group of people anyway to point out that the relationship between poverty and birth rates can be fairly simple in some ways. It's obviously a complex topic, but for the most part, when you start crushing people's capacity to provide for themselves, you're crushing their lineage in a sort of genealogical sense. How this matters to me so much is my hometown has been not only my hometown, but the whole region that I grew up with. Um, my parents and my grandparents all lived, all of them, as well as this is true for my wife as well. Uh, these are groups of 8 to 12 siblings everywhere you go. And then in a single generation, it goes down to families with one kid, maybe two, but that's unusual. And everybody in that generation is not having kids at all. Now, I don't know a single person who doesn't attribute their low number of children to the economic situations that they're in right now. This is entirely something that's been imposed on us by the state. And all of these things that matter so much to us, Chaorix, all four of us, it's people at the core. I mean, there's no dance, there's no food, there's no art without people. And the people are gone. The people who, I don't want to go so far as to say that they've been killed, but the people who would have been born that weren't born because of the situation that's been forced on us. Now, in my country, in Canada in particular, it's even more complex because there's this narrative that the government offers us. So it's like, well, we need to bring in immigrants. So this isn't going to be an anti-immigrant statement. I don't want anyone to think that. But the idea is because there's this Ponzi scheme, which is our pension system. And everybody who is in Canada or any comparable system understands how this works is that the people, you don't pay into your own pension, you pay into the current pensions in the hopes that when you are retired, what's going to happen is that the working people then will pay for your pension. This is very comparable to a Ponzi scheme or a pyramid scheme. But we're experiencing severe demographic collapse because of the severe economic poverty that we're all experiencing that's crushing our will to have even our just ability to have large families. So what we're being told is that we need to bring in people from away in order to compensate for this loss and preserve the pension system, a pension system that's forced on us. And what happens is the people who are coming in here, they're coming in because of financial incentives. So when we're in where I'm at now, we have just had the last of our century farms disappear. So our century farms are farms that were in the same family for 100 years. There's nothing left of that. Our whole island is just disappearing. And what's flooding in is people from away. And I don't care what race they are or what language they speak, but they're coming here for the economic incentives. They don't care about the architecture. They don't care about all the things that came before. And so my point here isn't to say anything against immigrants in particular. It's to say this is should be a deeply personal issue for all of us. And every single major step that we can identify that's contributing to the loss of our sense of homeland or sense of community, it's all directly the state. And again, I'm not blaming the immigrants. It's the state that we should be pointing the finger at for every step of this. So that's what I have to say about that. I do want to give some lip service to everybody. There's some people in the comments pointing out that it's a bit of an oversimplification to say money and birth rates are they're not a one-to-one thing, and of course that's true. But we have to, if you want to control for, there's always going to be people who have kids nonstop. There's always going to be people who would never have had kids anyway. But economic poverty does have a role to play in that. So that's everything that I wanted to say about that. Thanks everyone for giving me the airspace to give such a long-winded answer, but it's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. Chaorix, how do you feel about that, having heard all four of our answers on the topic?
Well, I definitely empathize with the loss of century farms and the pension system being a Ponzi scheme. We have the same problem here in France, and probably even worse. I want to give advice to everyone who's listening to this to patronize your local craftsmen, because they really need it, and they are being overkilled by regulations. And that's probably one of the main reasons why the tradition is dying. I totally agree with you there, and I agree with Zulu and the others as well, that we should compartmentalize as well and keep the virtues in mind while acknowledging and going beyond whatever evil may have been committed as well.
Excellent. So thanks so much for calling in with this. I want to give anybody else on the panel have anything they'd like to say before we move away from this topic.
I will say, because I believe it wasn't addressed, or it might have been addressed when I was taking a leak. On the other question of is there hope for the French or for the British or for any of these other cultures where there's a lot of socialism, is there hope for them to become less socialist? And I think absolutely yes. I am a full advocate of the white pill. Things will get better. And I base this on the Philosophical Theory of History by Larry Peikoff, that unless there is another Plato comes along, we're due for a more rational society.
Chaorix, thanks again. You should have the last word before we move on to our next caller.
Well, if that's all right, I would like to give the last word to one of those great men that I admire from my country, and I would like to do it in French, if possible.
Absolutely.
All right, it's
as long as it's a reasonable length.
Well, it's very short. I want to quote Victor Hugo. Changez vos opinions, gardez vos principes. Changez vos feuilles, gardez intactes vos racines. Which translates to change your opinions, keep your principles, change your leaves, and keep intact your roots. Thank you everyone for listening.
Thanks so much for calling in. We appreciate it very much. I look forward to hearing from you again. If possible, we're going to move on to our next caller now. I'm going to, again, remove you from the studio. It's not personal. It's just so we've got so many callers queued up. We're going to move on to our next caller. Guys, if you don't mind, stall for me here. I have to remember who the next caller is. So just give me a moment and talk amongst yourselves.
Seen any movies lately, guys? No.
I saw that the Odyssey was in full posted on Twitter. Like, it just got spammed on Twitter. And I thought about watching it, but when I went back to it, they removed it, unfortunately.
That's right. I did see one clip from that where it was what's his name? The guy from Twilight, Pattinson. Where he's like, somebody get these beggars out of here. And somebody commented on that saying he'd play a very good racist character. So you can hear it in his voice.
Just like Adam Driver in that one movie. I can't say the line, obviously, but
you spear chicken, you know.
Yeah.
I do think that I don't know what kind of twisting has to happen for Robert Pattinson to also play the Joker. But I want that to happen because I feel like he would be a very good Joker.
It's crazy, dude. His acting career has been one of like the wildest to witness.
You can tell he actually gives a shit, which is nice.
Yeah, he does.
Gentlemen, I hate to interrupt such a heartwarming direction that was going in. We've got a super chat that we should address first. But I do have a really interesting call lined up next, I should say. Unfortunately for our co-hosts, our guests, it's perfect for Zulu. But before we get to that, here's our super chat. Is the burden of proof on the person attempting to homestead to prove that what they're homesteading is not is not owned? Or is it on the person denying that the homestead can go forward? Let's start with Anarcho-Econ.
I mean, I think generally if you have someone coming up to, like, let's say you have like an abandoned house, like there's vines on the thing, it's like windows are broken. You can go and look at it and, evaluate the evidence at hand and say, yeah, I mean, this is probably unowned, but fundamentally, there could still be an owner. Maybe someone's putting up weird Halloween decorations and they just went, really over the line. So, I mean, yeah, you can't just go up to some property and make yourself at home. And then, the actual property owner tries to come in. You're like, oh, prove to me that you didn't own this beforehand. That's, that's my response.
Excellent. And Floppa?
I mean, the question is rather simple. I was more or less just gonna say what Anarcho-Econ said in that, like, there has to be some type of evidence to prove that a conflict may or may not occur, but I think it's interesting. So I'll pass it to Zulu, who may have be able to clarify it better.
Sure. So, I mean, we've all heard that saying, right? Possession is 9/10 of the law, right? It's a little bit prickly for libertarians because it makes it seem like, oh, well, he's got it. Sometimes it's used to like justify squatting and stuff like that. That's not the proper understanding of that. The proper understanding of that, in my view, is just another application of the principle of innocent until proven guilty, right? And this is itself an application of the burden of proof principle. It is the case that a person is innocent until you have shown that they are guilty. That is where the burden of proof lies. This is a fundamental law of epistemology that cannot be broken. Because fundamentally, let's imagine that I say there is actually a leprechaun sitting here on my desk at Galazar. Prove me wrong. Of course, Galazar wouldn't actually be. He might be able to like break into my house with a camera, take the camera at my desk, and go, see, there's no leprechaun. But I go, it's an invisible leprechaun, idiot. Like, what are you talking about? Of course, leprechauns can go invisible. Galazar actually has no means. If I can just keep playing this game forever, Galazar has no possible means of pointing to the non-existence of something. What do we know from Parmenides? That which is. That which isn't. This goes right back to ancient Greece. That which isn't. What does that mean? It means you can't show a positive example of a non-existent thing. You can't positively demonstrate the non-existence of something. That is why we have the burden of proof principle, and that is why it's properly applied in the case of law to innocent until proven guilty. It's claiming that somebody has committed the crime. That is the positive claim that must be shown.
Excellent. Well, there is your super chat. We're moving on to our next caller. This is Donkey Dung. Donkey Dung, you're on the line. You've got a really interesting question for us. I'm going to have to put it right to Zulu. Sorry, Zulu, I'm forcing you to monopolize the conversation here. Donkey Dung, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can.
Perfect. All right. I read your question, but I think I'd like it best if you pose it again now, and I'll let Zulu respond to you directly.
So my question goes down to the idea of how exactly do you preserve nature in an Ancap society? I've had Terminal Odyssey in the Ancap Discord explain to me about how there'd be no monopolization on air pollution, but in terms of natural landscapes, it seems as though the main focus is primarily upon human infrastructure and building things like concrete jungles and whatnot, rather than having the nature that helps sustain us. So things like wild natural national parks and whatnot, they seem to be kind of at odds with Ancap philosophy in at least as far as I'm aware. So if I could have some understanding on how things like that would work in an Ancap society, that would be, yeah.
So I understand why Galazar would put this to me first, because I wrote an article, later turned it into a video, called the Anti-Environment Manifesto. Because I am indeed, I am a man who hates nature. I think it is good when nature is destroyed. It should be destroyed and made into something that better suits humans. Now, what do I mean by this? Do I mean that you're allowed to go and pump pollution out into everybody's lungs? Definitely not. That's a property crime. And in fact, a property crime that was dealt with by the courts before the government got involved. And we now have things like the EPA, where you're allowed to pollute to a certain degree with your pollution license. So what do I mean when I say I want to destroy nature? Well, what is the environment? What is nature? It's things like rocks, trees, all these things. What is non-natural? Well, it would be bricks. It would be a wooden table. So the fundamental distinction is that the natural has not been touched by humans. It has not been implemented into any productive process to achieve human wants. Whereas the non-natural has had that happen. So almost just tautologically, the less nature you have, that means more things are being used to satisfy human wants. And now these can be all sorts of things. They can be a nice hiking trail. You don't get hiking trails in nature. You get Shackleton crawling his way across Antarctica to try and plant his flag at the South Pole, and everybody along the way dying terribly. You get the gap in South America. I can't remember its name. You try and hike through that, you're going to die unless you're like an actual explorer, right? People don't like nature. I want to be perhaps on a nice grassy vista with maintained trees, so it's not going to have a forest fire in my face, and without a bear coming around the corner to claw me to death. I want a managed environment, and that is specifically non-natural. I want it to be managed by humans to make it as comfortable for human habitation as possible.
May I
Super.
say something?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I also think Zulu made an awesome point a while back talking about this as well, where private ownership actually solves a lot of this, because it creates the incentive to actually preserve nature in a sustainable way that people can actually enjoy, because the person who owns whatever park or reserve or whatever would be able to profit off of people touring it, or just enjoying the land. And I believe that was his argument, more or less. I could be mistaken.
Yeah,
Sure.
like in essence, if you have humans in there making it productive, then it still could be nice and green and everything, but it's going to be maintained at a much more appropriate human level, which you don't really get that in very many places. And the places you do get it, people are like, absolutely do not go there. It's terrible.
I want to contribute something on this topic from the Austrian perspective, but we've got Anarcho Econ here with us, so I think I should give him the floor first to share his thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't really said it better than Zulu and Floppa, but I'll just share a quick anecdote to kind of concretize this. I was going hiking up in New England a little bit earlier, and I was going through this hiking trail, and I hadn't looked at the description, but apparently they hadn't tended to the trail for a while, and so the farther I got up this trail, it was horrible. It really was one of the most miserable experiences of my life, and I love hiking, but there was all these mud piles on the trail and all these fallen trees. It's like, so you can certainly have these beautiful natural environments, but we want them to be maintained by people, right? Please go try and go out into nature on these like unmaintained trails or without a trail at all, and you'll see it's not very fun. That's all I really have to add.
Perfect. Well, one thing I'd like to say. Sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say that it also solves how much of this environment that humans essentially determine would be necessary, because the market would like right now we have the government appropriating the land, and there's no way to tell how much it is actually the how do I say it, like the most markedly efficient amount that would be necessary. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm stumbling on my words a little, but I hope you understand.
Well, value productive would be the normal term. Like, what is
yes
attaining human ends?
I think that the for me, the main concern here, I think that we really need to address a problem that is deeply embedded in the caller's concern here. So there seems to be a concern that there's an overproduction of industrial buildings and the things that are around those. There's an overproduction of smog and all these kinds of things. We need to ask ourselves very, very carefully and with great deliberation, how do we determine the optimum amount of something to produce, whether it's bricks, whether it's buildings, whether it's cars that need buildings that are made out of bricks? How do we determine the best way to do this? Now, we're going to put forward that the price system is the only way that you could even attempt a solution of this. And something I think that needs to be considered directly from the Austrian school, or just economics proper, is marginal utility. So when you have a good of some kind, it goes to the highest use, the most important use to you, to which you can put it. And each additional unit of that thing is going to go to the next highest use. So if you have bottles of water, the most important thing you can do with it might be to drink it. If you get a second bottle of water, the most important thing might be to give it to your dog to drink. The third one might be to wash your armpits. The fourth one might be to water a houseplant, right? And so on. And each one of these things, demonstrated by what the human is doing with them, are successively less important. Now, there's a sort of inverse effect. So if we consider two goods, the more of one thing you get, the less valuable the next unit's going to be to you. So if I've already got 100 bottles of water, the next use for it, I might have no use for it other than to empty it out and try to do that thing where you try to flip it and make it land, or you got a little bit of water left on it, right? That might be the best thing I can think of to do with it. Obviously, that is far less important than drinking it or feeding my dog or whatever. If you're trading water bottles for, let's say, gold, then each successive unit of water becomes that you obtain is less important, and you have less gold. So the marginal unit, the next gold that you give up, is more important because what you're giving up is becoming more and more important. So if I have 4 bottles of water and I lose one, I can no longer water the houseplant. So the next one I lose is going to be even more important because now I can't wash my armpits. So this is a really important part of economics. What relevance does this have to nature? Well, as human beings are expanding, there's some optimum amount that's intrinsic to how they're spending their money of the nature that's good for them. Okay, some neighborhoods are absolutely loaded with trees. There's parks everywhere. Some are industrial. But how do we know the right way to do this? Well, it's intrinsic to economics that as we are building more, the more industrial stuff that we're building, the less nature we have, and you're experiencing this sort of marginal utility trade-off that's happening. So the next parking lot is a lot less useful to us than the next tree that we have to cut down to make it. Economics on a free market is such a beautiful system because instead of being the whims of some dictator, which can be a democratically elected dictator or a more traditional one, they have no constraints on the devastation that they can and will and are fully incentivized to inflict. I mean, there's so many books out there, and I know it's a cheap shot to just refer to books, but there's so many books out there about how the Soviet Union, just to represent a standard dictatorial type of government, has just obliterated the environment. But more importantly, the intrinsic facts of how humans organize themselves, it necessitates that we're on our way to finding the right amount of nature and the right amount of industry. I don't think that there is any answer that can be given outside of the free market to even try to figure out what that right answer, what that right quantity could possibly be. I said I wasn't going to answer any more questions, and here I am. What do you think about that, our caller Donkey?
I think you explained it really well. The only thing that I could really comment on is something that you brought up, Galazar, is in terms of as humans expand and grow more numerous, obviously we'll go out more and homestead into these into these places of nature and whatnot, and things like houses will become more and more needed. And I suppose it kind of goes back to that one Lorax quote, where as we expand in numbers, how exactly will things like food and oxygen be preserved in the Ancap system? I know there's probably an answer that I could probably think of off the top of my head, but I'm just curious and want to go a bit further down this rabbit hole, if that's fine.
Just to make sure you get a good answer, is the question something like, am I accurately representing your question as something like, how do we not accidentally have more babies than we can feed?
All right, you've basically summarized it quite well. I think, yeah, that's, now that I'm looking at my question, that seems a bit stupid, but
well, that's not you said it, not me.
Yeah, no worries. Off the top of my head, there's not really much else I can add. Then you've explained it really well, so thank you for that.
It's my pleasure. I want to get some more from our guests before we send you on your way. But I do want to say, if you're concerned about this, I would implore you to consider that main question: how do we know what the right amount is? Because you can obviously, if you take that remember I was telling you like we're trading water bottles for gold. Well, if we go all the way, like what if the whole world was trees and we could make a really simple, I don't know, a windmill, but we just have to cut one tree down. Obviously, well, unless you actually want all the human beings to be dead, you're obviously going to cut the first tree down to get the first windmill. So there is a question there underlying. The question is, what is that right amount? And that I really believe that pursuing that in earnest will take you to why the free market is going to be the best, because the free market is going to answer that question. How can we get the most food? But instead of going into explaining that, let's send it back around. Zulu, we'll start it with you and send it to our co-hosts.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I did very much like the hero of the Lorax. I believe his name was the Onceler, where he wants to take these godforsaken trees down.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't mean to cut you off. Can you just restate the last thing you said, Galazar? I didn't hear you.
Oh my God, I don't remember.
I believe it was about how you need to concern yourself with how do you get the right amount of something, because you're going to be wanting to cut down that first tree for that first mill so you can make flour and feed people and stuff. And there's going to be some proper amount of trees, and the only way to solve that is through the market. I believe that's the gist of what Galazar was saying.
That's exactly right. The question is just, what is the optimum amount of something to produce? That's the question. And all I was saying was that question only has, as far as we're concerned anyway, that question only has one answer, and it will take you. If you're pursuing that question honestly, it'll take you to, I think, the right place. That's all I was saying.
Okay, thank you.
And I will say on that point, I do have this video, why socialism is literally impossible, which will kind of highlight why we think there's only one answer here, why the socialist system couldn't actually answer that question in any way possible. It could not find the most value productive use of resources. But anyway, so yeah, no, on the Lorax question, the reason why that would differ from reality is that, well, if people are answering Galazar's question, first of all, there's not going to be a monopolist on air, so anybody could go out there and produce air. They're not going to cut down all the trees. Somebody will go, hey, actually, these Thanid trees, they're very valuable. I'm going to have a plantation of these things, and then I can have a renewable resource, and I'll be the Thanid guy. It wouldn't be everybody just, it cuts them down. I believe in that movie, there's even like a patent on Thanids or something. I don't know. It's been a while since I watched it. I think I watched it like in school or some shit. But yeah, that's why we think that type of scenario wouldn't actually occur. But yeah, no. So if the guests want to weigh in on it at all, then feel free.
I mean,
I think I'm good.
Oh yeah, I could just, to wrap it up. All I really have to say is, I think when we say like we want to completely destroy the environment, there's almost this assumption of like high time preference, like this assumption that when we say that, we mean oh, I'm just going to literally use every resource right now and not plan for the future whatsoever, and just consume, and then all of humanity is going to die. And it's like, I think that's a very large misrepresentation of the free market, because of what you guys have been saying. If this was a problem, if this resource is running out, that's a big problem. Where's the best place to solve it? The free market. What's the correct amount to use? The free market is going to provide the answers to these. So I don't think this like high time preference, just consuming all of the resource, then not thinking about tomorrow, is a appropriate framing, which is what you get from the Lorax. Sorry.
This might be, I don't know, maybe this is the perfect analogy. I actually worked on an extremely profitable tree farm a couple of years ago. And this tree farm didn't actually take up that much space, but was so effective at producing trees that we were providing. So I live in Canada. We were providing trees for the whole planet. We were sending trees to Vietnam. Okay. Like we were sending trees like to British Columbia, to Nova Scotia, to California, everywhere. And it's so interesting to me because there's such a huge, like, we obviously still have a freaking lot of trees, and there's already this huge market that shows, even in our current state of affairs, like people want trees, and that want for trees has resulted in like a very big incentive for people to be very, very good at producing very healthy, beautiful trees and sending them all over the world. And I think it's just a beautiful thing to behold. I would like to give the last word before we move on to our caller.
Thank you for that. That was really informative. I'm glad I got that through. Based if true, I love your videos a lot, man. Even if they're a bit sloppy, and I'm hoping
Thank you.
I'm hoping to see more from the Floptic channel because I really love Basic Logic. I'm about to watch his new video now, actually. So, just God bless you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
so
man.
much. Have a good one. And on the topic of shout outs, we actually had a super chat with a shout out in it. So I'm going to pull that up right quick before we get our next caller. This super chat reads, we're doing great stuff. Keep it up. Wanted to point Zulu particularly, but we're all getting the message. So here's the big shout out to some potential content, which is Natty Bud Light on YouTube. Is anyone here familiar with that user?
Yes. So actually, let me show you a little something. Seeing Ask Ancap screen share. There we go. Yeah, so I've actually got this little folder with things I'm planning to react to on stream, and I've got a little subfolder specifically for Natty Bud Light. Also, I'm not sure why I still have the chat in this scene. Obviously, that's not going to fucking work because I'm on a different channel.
All right, well, there you go. I hope that you don't regret the super chat now, because clearly that is totally redundant. All right, let's move on to our next caller. We've got so many callers today. Thanks so much, everybody. We've even got some callers who are not Ancaps for once, like Soren earlier. So exciting. Let me check in with our co-host. How's everyone holding up over there? Is everyone okay? Does everyone need hydration?
I'm a little cold. If you could give me like a tea or something whenever you're able.
I'm gonna put Anarcho Econ on that.
What's your favorite tea?
I've actually, there's this company called Tea Pigs. If you're in the UK, I don't know if they ship outside the UK, but they have a really nice chai, which is very delicious. That's probably my favorite.
Chai is good. I'm from the South, so whatever tea you give me, just fill it full of sugar. It's what us Americans love.
In the south of the US, I think you guys do a lot more like iced teas where it's got all sorts of different stuff in there.
Yeah,
we're a lot more straightforward. Tea in this country is basically you pour the boiling water into the tea bag, maybe add a little bit of milk and some like a couple of sugars. But yeah, no, in the US it looks like crazy style stuff they got going on there. It's like a milkshake but tea.
That's what we love.
I have to say the Southern sweet tea is addicting. I mean, I'll drink like half of an entire gallon jug in like a couple days, or like a day. So.
Oh, have you heard of Milo's?
No, I'm not from down south, but we have our imitation crap up here. I'm in the north, but I'm sure it's much better.
Dude, I could drink a half a gallon in a single day, man. It is crack, truly.
All right, enough. We're moving on to our next call now. What ridiculousness. All right, we're moving on to our next caller. This is Diogo, who is calling in to ask about, if I remember correctly, you have a question about special economic zones. Diogo, can you hear us?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I certainly can. All right, so it's been a little while. You've been in queue for a long time. Thanks for waiting. If you wouldn't mind, I think it'd be best if you just asked your question outright, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, I just want to ask, like, what is the vision of Ancap about these special economic zones? Because I had an Ancap friend that used the SEZ from China as an example of free market and the low influence of the state in the economy. And I'm not an Ancap. I'm the opposed. I'm a fascist. But I certainly believe that SEZs, the special economic zones, are very beneficial. But I don't see them as an example of anarcho-capitalistic society. And I just want to know the vision of you guys about this, about the SEZs.
I want to hand it to Floppa first, but before I do that, I think I just want to help Floppa out here. Could you add to your question, what is it you think is a characteristic of these special economic zones that makes them different from Ancap?
This is a question for me.
Yes, sir.
Okay, sorry. The fact that there is an state, the fact that the state works on the infrastructure and those public works, like building roads, infrastructure, energy, and those kind of things. I'm pretty sure that the SEZs from China aren't like stateless, and I am not sure if they are like ultra liberal or Ancap in some way. I really don't know the difference between those, but I see that the fact that there is a state that is just like working on low influence, if it's the same thing.
Yeah. So I'm not particularly sure about all of the mechanisms of the special economic zones in China specifically, but I think a better question is which direction do we want to be moving in? Because we see that these special economic zones clearly have less state regulation than I guess the rest of China or whatever, or the certain parts. So if we see that deregulating it is leading to, I believe China's special economic zones are like massive, and we can see that historically when they were implemented, like these were essentially like farm villages, and then they got turned into these massive cities essentially. So I just don't understand why we would want to move away from that, or like the free market direction seems to be providing us the most prosperous scenario for these places. So I'll pass it on to Anarch or Econ because he could probably elaborate a bit further on this.
I mean, yeah, these zones are certainly not anarchists. They're under the wing of the Chinese state. So I'm guessing if you tried to say I'm going to set up my own arbitration firm and we're not going to care about any of the Chinese laws and we're going to care about the NAP, then you certainly I'm sure the government would come in and stop you. But it's more so to the extent we adopt these the premises that these economic zones have been founded on, you'll have a more prosperous society. So if you look at this is the error of regression theory, specifically where do these economic zones come from? Well, it's the Chinese government going in and saying we can't solve problems. Actually, the government can't solve problems. And so if they consistently applied the premises that led to these economic zones, I suspect you probably would live in an ANCAP society fairly soon after people applied that. But it isn't an exact parallel.
What do you think about that, Diogo?
Yeah, I think this enlightened me. So yeah, just make sure you could choose to live in a society like this and that will be enough, or like there is a barrier that we need to cross to achieve the true NCAP society.
I would say we would want to go a step farther and get rid of the entire Chinese government influence, and completely leave it up to the market and the non-aggression principle. But they're on the right track essentially.
That's okay for me.
I will say on these special economic zones, they are just a complete and utter ceding of the argument to capitalism. It is just a total acknowledgement that capitalism is indeed superior. And we saw this in the Soviet Union as well. They had to look to outside prices to do their planning, which means that, well, in fact, they don't know how to discover the prices. So if they succeeded and the entire world went communist, I'm not sure exactly what external prices they're going to be looking at. And of course, the Chinese solution to this to gain access to Western markets and gain access to some amount of that prosperity is with these special economic zones. And then they get access to the Western goods and all that, and then they can do their planning better. It's just a complete capitulation of the entire argument. And well, if capitalism is so good and works so well to that degree, why the hell wouldn't it work to a full degree? That's kind of the lingering question, which no state can possibly answer. Because I think on some level, a lot of them understand that, yeah, they do have more prosperity if they liberalize, if they pull off a little bit, but they still want their goodies, right? So they want to have a certain level of liberalization, but not full liberalization, because then they would have to actually start competing.
Yeah, I like your answers. Like, it's very enough for me. Thank you for the answers.
Certainly. Well, let me just say, because I don't want you to go too fast here, we're very excited to have somebody who identifies as a fascist to come in. So before you go, and if you have anything else you're going to say too, please, you can get that in there as well. But I really want to know, you're coming from a fascist point of view. You got this perception of Ancap, and you see a relationship between, Ancap is or isn't good for whatever reasons, and there's some sort of special economic zones have some role to play in that. I'm wondering personally, did you feel before calling in, or do you still feel that there's something about special economic zones that potentially offer a refutation to Ancap? And if you do feel that way, I was wondering if you'd share with us what that looks like.
My vision on the economy and how it's handled, it's that the special economic zones are very good if you broke the law in copyright. It's not copyright, I don't know. Like the intellectual property, like you abolish it, so your government can steal the blueprints from those SEZs. And I see this as a something good for the fascist government, because they can create a project that will lead the economy. China does this. The mainland China uses the SEZs to steal blueprints. And that's for me, China is fascist, so I believe that it's not I'm not an Ancap. I don't believe that the SEZs are in somehow an Ancap way, to a liberal way to get to the Ancap society, but I believe that they are like pillars to hold the fascist economy. I made myself clear.
A question. If SEZs are so good and they can stand as these pillars of the fascist economy, would you be opposed to having the entire region be under those same rules? And then you could have so many pillars. You could probably have like a super tall building if you had that many pillars. Like, why not have it applied everywhere?
Because I believe that this weakens the fascist state. And I believe that China today is growing to be the next.
So then the fascist state is in fact opposed to the people. It is opposed to the prosperity of the people, because we've already established that these special economic zones, they are the pillars of productivity and prosperity, but it's at the expense of the fascist state, which I would completely agree. It is at the expense of the fascist state. But then the question is, why is the fascism more important than the prosperity?
I don't say that. I see the fascist government a way to achieve prosperity to everyone.
Using SEZs?
As a tool, not the main goal. We use them to steal blueprints.
Prosperity coming from the special economic zones.
Because we use them to steal
all the prosperity from those zones. So they are the source of the prosperity. They are the fountainhead. So why do we need the people downstream who are sucking it all away? Why not just have that fountainhead be
Yeah,
everywhere?
that's a very good question. That's a very good question that I cannot answer now.
Let me just jump in here, if I may. Anarcho-econ, are you familiar with the economic calculation problem?
Certainly.
Would you do me a favor and ask our caller here, Diogo, how a fascist society knows the right amount of anything to produce? I'd be
I
really
mean,
interested in hearing that between the two of you.
Yeah, I mean, this claim that the fascist government is somehow going to bring about prosperity. I mean, how, right? Fundamentally, prosperity needs to be achieved by producing something. And how does the fascist government know what to produce given the ECP? I mean, and maybe Diogo, maybe you're unfamiliar with the ECP, and we can elucidate, what exactly what it is to you. But if you are familiar with the ECP, I'll just ask you. I mean, how does the fascist government know what to produce? How can it reduce scarcity, which is, in line with increasing prosperity?
We are not against private property. So the market is still present in the fascist economy. The difference is that the fascist state, he sort of control the lack of the economy, the things that are lacking in the economy. Like if we have a big deficit in iron for some reason, we can make a project that will bring capital to produce more iron. You see, it's not a total planet, but it's not full liberal. I'm not sure if I'm making myself clear, because my words in English are very little.
Well, the
Sorry.
question
Let's
that
say
he's
that-
getting at, like a central question here is, so yes, it's easy enough to say we don't have enough iron, we need to put more capital to it. The problem that is being gotten here is that everything, we could always have more of anything. It's very difficult for us, especially if you're in a socialist economy. You're very rarely going to have an objectively too much of something. So the question is, it's not enough. There isn't just capital that we just pull out of the air and we need it. Everything has an opportunity cost. It comes from somewhere else. So if you're going to take capital and put it to the iron mine, you need to be able to know what it's coming away from. So you're going to say, okay, well, if we send a certain amount of capital to a certain mine, we'll get a certain amount more of that mine's product, but we're going to get a certain amount less of the other things. So we're like, I think for people who aren't familiar with the economic calculation problem, they don't understand. And I don't want to make that assumption about you, Diogo, but it's very easy to just say, oh, we don't have enough iron and we have too much corn, so we're going to just we'll take capital at a corn production, put it at the iron production. What we're invoking here, what we're trying to invite everybody to consider is, we're not giving you that. We're asking, how do you know when it's better to take capital from one production and put it to another? What process reveals to you that is an appropriate action to take?
Can I perhaps even further clarify that? Let's say we know that, let's just grant, for the sake of argument, that you've got perfect knowledge on the wants of all consumers. You've got like Star Trek chips in their brain. You know exactly what everybody wants. You know, okay, well, we need more iron to produce these pans. People really want iron pans for their specific properties or whatever. Okay, how do you know the best way to get that iron? Because there are multiple different ways you could get iron. You could go down into a mine with pickaxes and take it out that way. You could go down into the mine. You could have like massive open mines where you just blow everything up. And how do you transport that iron? Well, you can use a railroad. Okay, but which route should the railroad take? Should it go around the mountain? Should it go through the mountain, going around? Well, that's going to cost more resources, physical resources, but less engineering time. Whereas going through the mountain, fewer resources, way more engineering time. How do you know how to balance up all these different things? So it's not even necessarily how do you know what to produce. What we're claiming is that the central planner has no possible means, or maybe he does, if you could tell us, what possible means does the central planner have to know the best way to produce those final goods? right? How does he select between these processes without going, okay, well, this line of production is making a loss. We need to fix this.
I really don't know how to answer this question, and I really don't know which part of my thinking will be wrong. But I stand out for 5-year plans. I believe that they can have a better understanding of the characteristics of the economy and the problems within the economy. So, when I say that, oh, we are lacking, we need more iron, I mean, we need more iron to produce something that the government has planned before. So, this is a problem that we will not have like in the exact same moment we need to learn how to fix it. It's a problem that we will predict, and the Chinese government do this today. So I don't think that is impossible to conceive a society where you can predict your market, your economy, if it's controlled. Uh, of course, the prices you will not control. Who you control? This is the market. We will not like control 100% of this. I'm not sure if the that problem, I forgot totally the name, pressing this key of we don't know the price or we don't know how to rearrange the capital without it doing for itself. So I'm pretty sorry, I'm pretty confused in my own words.
Well, we appreciate you fielding the question for us. Is that Floppa? Because I was going to hand it over to Floppa.
Yeah, I would just like to say that it's completely fine that you don't know how a state would manage this, because not even the states know how they would manage this problem. So you're not alone in that. But that's why we're presenting the case that the free market is actually the best determiner to how to solve the ECP at the end of the day.
It's okay. I will study about this.
Well, Mr. Diogo, it was a pleasant hearing from you. I really appreciate hearing from anybody who's not an Ancap, and we've had a load of them today, which is a really nice change. It was always it was very pleasant and respectful. I encourage you, anytime that you have something you'd like to talk about, a challenge for us or a question, please feel free to call back in. We're going to move to the next caller, but before we do, I'd like you to have the last word.
No, it's okay. I just wanted to know the difference between the SEZs and the Ancap society, but I think this was enough for me.
Super. All right. Well, thanks so much. Have a good rest of the day, and we'll move on to our next caller now. Our next caller is Lewis. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Lewis, you're on the line. Can you hear us?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I certainly can. And it sounds like you were, I think I caught in the chat that you had emailed Zulu at some point. So I'm going to let you just jump right in with your question, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so I emailed Zulu personally because I was having a bit of a crisis because I've been looking at Ancap for quite a while now, and I looked at all the main principles, and I came from, like, I'm just about to enter college, like, which for the Americans out there is what you call it, junior year of high school. And so I've grown up with intersectional neo-Marxism basically baked in the system, and so I've basically come from that sort of area, and I've always been super libertarian, but I've always had one gripe which has really just like bothered me, and I'm sorry, you're probably not going to want to hear this name, Flopper, but it's actually something it was actually King Critical that brought it up.
Oh no, just kidding. Just kidding.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I know you and him are in a bit of back and forth right now. You know.
Yeah, it's all good.
Yeah, friendly back and forth, I'm sure.
Yes.
But it was that, you know how socialism and communism and fascism as well can only really be enacted through use of force, right? Well, how can realistically, how can this Ancap society really be enacted if not getting rid of the people that don't agree with you, i.e., people who believe there should be a state, people who support the state? Like, how can this actually be, enacted? Do we promote like a consciousness of like how the state is bad? Because our institutions are just completely captured by neo-Marxists and have been since the critical theorists in the 50s. So, and in this new college that I'm going to right now, there is a Marxist reading club, but I mean, there's no bloody, Rothbardian club where you look at objectivism and stuff like that and Austrian economics. So I suppose that's really my question of how can we get more people to be Ancap, and really, how do we make this happen? If
May I have a suggestion right off the bat? I am assuming you're English, right?
Yeah.
So there is a UK Libertarian Party, at least as far as the Scottish Libertarian Party, I know they do regular meetups, and that kind of gave me a little bit of like, a morale boost. I would suggest just right off the bat, try to find other like libertarian meetups in your area or in areas you could go to, presumably with the UKLP. I've heard from the leader of the Scottish LP that they're all right. So definitely try to find your people. And if you can see them in real life, like they're actual flesh and blood human beings, it makes it a lot clearer. Like, okay, well, this isn't a permanent state of being for man. You can, in fact, have people who break through, and it can help you swallow that white pill that will, in fact, the neo-Marxists, they are a dying breed. They're not going to be able to continue without another Plato to give them a boost. They simply can't, because guess what? We've got this Ayn Rand, the holy figure, peace be upon her. She came along and she smited and answered all of the philosophies of the past and has set us out on a new route. And that new route, it can keep going unimpeded unless somebody else comes along who then has to be answered. When somebody else comes along who has to be answered, then I'll start blackpilling and start saying, we need to fucking solve this right now. But I am a massive proponent of the white pill, because that has not happened yet. I don't see it happening anytime soon.
And yeah, I guess my problem with it is because I used to follow this guy on YouTube. He doesn't really do his he took down his politics channel actually because of he couldn't take people calling him this and that and the other. But he spoke of the utopian death cult, which is basically this idea that if you believe that that your principles are the right way to live and you follow them dogmatically, then I suppose the logical conclusion of that is that I suppose the ends justify the means of getting there. But I thought about it, and I'm like, all the authoritarian regimes that we've had, all the utopian death cults that we've had, they've all been on the side of order, not anarchy. They've all believed in the dialectic. Third positionists, communists, Marxists, and I suppose I'm like, how do I know that I'm not getting into my own sort of like? How do I know that I'm not getting into sort of like I don't know, my own sort of utopian death cult in a way where all these ideas, because trust me, all these ideas, they sound appealing, but I think it's just the fear of being wrong, because I've seen how dogmatic and butthurt the Marxists get whenever I talk to them. But I don't want that to be I don't want that to be me, I guess.
Well, I
I hope-
really hope that you don't make a decision about. I mean, it can be really difficult for you to persist on your path if you perceive that your ideological team, let's say, is akin to a death cult. That's a big hazard, and I think the most important thing to start off with for you there is to say, what's right is right, and we can't determine these things based on their popularity. Certainly, you must realize that our opponents want you to be trying to make your decision about what you're going to label yourself as and what you're going to participate in. They want you to be making that decision based on popularity, because they want to do everything in their power to make you feel like you're unpopular. That's why so often, I mean, like Zulu and myself, we're not trying to play a victim card here, but we're subject to basically constant abuse online daily. Some days are worse than others, but it's pretty much unending. And I really truly believe that they're doing that because they want us to think that we're unpopular and that they want us to make our decisions that way. But right and wrong isn't connected to that. Unfortunately, it seems to me, and this is maybe a little anecdotal, it seems to me that what is right is very seldom what is easy. Maybe it's never what's easy. And I think I gravitate towards people who are of the idea, the philosophy, let's say, that anarcho-capitalism is an idea that they reached not because it was popular, but because they really thought about it and they're convinced of it for good reasons. And having reached that point of view, they are going to fight for it, whether they even, it's not even just that they think it's popular, but whether they're going to succeed or not. It's worth fighting on the side of truth and justice, let's say, regardless. And so I think that is a much more grounding perspective to have on that. And I would recommend, if you feel those thoughts creeping in, do whatever you can, including reaching out to us if you have to push them away. I hope that that's been somewhat relevant to your question. But in case it wasn't, I want to hand it over to Zulu, and then Zulu, if appropriate, let's see what I have a feeling that both of our co-hosts here have gone through the process of becoming libertarians and anarcho-capitalists. So I'd love to see what they might offer on this topic as well, because I think it can be. Just for record, we have a channel in our Discord just called the White Pill Triage, and that only exists because it can be really hard to maintain the white pill sometimes. So Zulu.
Yeah, so sorry, can you repeat the question? I just had like a weird smell, and I thought somebody was cooking chicken nuggets in my house for a second there. So I had to look if somebody had broken in.
To be honest, I forgot my question as well. But
I think you were essentially asking us, the implication I was getting was about the white pill, right? Like, how do you keep from pushing away this idea that Ancap is just another dime a dozen, fringe radical cult, right?
Yeah, I mean, I know that it is like the total polar opposite of what we had in the 20th century. So basically communism, fascism, and Nazism. The third way. But it's just like the fear of like, I know that, I know like the objectivism and stuff like that, but it's just like that constant kind of feeling of, what if I'm wrong? What if all these ideas that I'm taking in, what if they just, lead to, I don't know, Somalia or something like that? What if the Marxists actually have a point? And I know that's absurd, but I think it's more to do with a mental health issue rather than anything else. It's definitely not based in logic, but it's more so centered around, well, how is this actually going to happen? How am I going to able to convince people to believe in the NAP and read Ayn Rand and all that sort of thing instead of just listening to what the person with a septum ring down their bloody nose says.
I
One
think
of the oh sorry
oh, sorry, you go ahead. You've been trying to talk for so long.
no, it's all good. One of the callers earlier, when mentioning the SEZs, I think an incredible white pill is that we know that private institutions and the private alternative outperform the state alternative, and implementing these systems would necessarily make the state increasingly less necessary. So it's wow. I completely forgot what my last point was, but yeah,
Well,
sorry.
we cut you off too much. Maybe if you remember it.
Yeah, no,
maybe.
I had it all in my head, and then it's okay. It's okay.
Yeah, so I think a great thing. The caller, apologies, I forgot your name, Louis or something. I think a great thing you could do is go through. There's this series on YouTube called "The History of Philosophy," or maybe called "The History of Western Philosophy," by Leonard Peikoff. It's this lecture series. It's the lecture series that convinced me of objectivism. He goes through, and I think it's very important to see the progression of the history of philosophy, because I think that can disabuse you of a lot of these notions that like this could be something like the Marxists. You can see the logical progression of how each idea leads into the next, and you can see how a lot of it is just complete subversions and how you can kind of rise above that. I think that would be a very positive experience for you.
And I remember something Zulu said to me is that our system is actually the one that creates a high trust society and a low time preference society. So that's also another white pill that we can recognize it to be true.
Yeah, I just don't want to make the the Marxist mistake of which will lead to loads of violence, as we've already seen. Like I remember there was that UK journalist who I think he was in Paris or something, and Antifa saw him, and he didn't do anything wrong, and they just beat him up like for no reason. And I see this increasing like violence like day by day, and my current schools, of like people feeling justified to initiate aggression on the left. And so when you take an opposite view of the libertarian view instead of the authoritarian view, it's very isolating, especially in this a day and age. And you kind of think, oh well, I could be a robot like them, but something is holding me back and staying in this kind of anarcho-capitalist libertarian position. And yeah.
So, are you concerned about violence being inflicted against you, or are you more concerned about that you're in a movement that itself is going to become violent? I want to clarify that.
The second.
Well, that is an interesting one for sure, because I've definitely heard from like libertarian types who promote violence. Very rarely, but I have heard from them. But anarcho-capitalism, I think, is not the same kind of umbrella that you can find with libertarianism. I think if you go to a libertarian convention, you're going to find the type of prepper who's just waiting to blow up a post office. We meet them, especially like myself being involved in actual politics. It's just they're out there. But anarcho-capitalism is something specific, and I don't think that the essential elements of it that are specific, I don't think they lend themselves to becoming violent. Now, of course, there's a sort of possibility that the anarcho-capitalist movement becomes hijacked by people who are violent, and then that ends up developing that way. I suppose that's not an impossibility. But if you don't want to be somebody who participates in violence, especially aggressive violence, we certainly don't. I think everybody here on the panel, we all consider violence a severe abhorrence. You want to be grounded in a philosophy that is going to give you a good result on that. I mean, I'm not necessarily recommending that you philosophize backwards from the result you want, but just as a matter of for the nearsighted purpose of reassuring you, anarcho-capitalism, I'm very confident, is the best philosophy out there for keeping you from ever becoming an aggressor. I want to hear from Anarcho-Econ and then maybe Flappa about what they think about this conversation so far.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of you know, the ANCAP movement potentially getting violent, I'll say if we ever have a violent quote unquote ANCAP movement, we've lost the movement. It's almost like you know, those kind of big tent libertarians who advocate for like kind of middle of the road, like just kind of nothing burger compromise policies. It's like once we start doing that, we've lost the movement, you know? So if you have this you know, this violent group of supposed ANCAPs, I think that you know, they're not really ANCAPs anymore. And, you know, as long as we're being consistent, I don't think you're really ever going to get violence, you know, aggression, really, violence maybe, but aggression as the answer to some sort of problem. And, you know, if you do, then I don't think we're really being ANCAPs in that respect anymore if we get that as an answer.
If I can extrapolate your question, are you concerned with how ANCAPs would respond to violence? Is that?
Well, I suppose it's just like on how, you know, on how to achieve an ANCAP society, really, you know, with, you know, if you're going to convince the masses of people, because obviously, you know, I had to look in depth because, you know, when I was well, I'm still in high school, but when I was looking at all these movements, all these political movements, you know, the big ones, that's not, you know, the status quo of what we have now, they all kind of, I don't know, for lack of a better term, turn to shit. And, you know, and it's just I suppose it's just the intrusive fear that I have that, you know, either it's going to be violent in order to take control, or it's just a fantasy, and we're never going to be able to convince people of our principles, I guess.
I'd hate to hear. I don't want that to hang on a silence in response. Somebody jump in here. I know all four of us have just got pockets full of white pills for totally legal reasons, and we're just dying. We just don't know which one is the most effective one to give you.
Yeah, I'm just doing some deep contemplation, so I don't mean to be silent in response to him.
I mean, I can say it seems like there's a bit of a strategical aspect to your question. It's like, how do we overcome this massive, you know, mountain of socialism? And I mean, I think, you know, you brought up earlier, you know, all of these intellectual institutions like the colleges and whatnot that you're looking at, they have like Marxist reading groups, and they have like all the professors are like Marxists. It's like, well, they did that specifically by, I mean, I'm not going to speak for anyone else, but I know I certainly do. Liquid Zulu certainly does believe in the remnant strategy. So, you know, they convinced the philosophers, and these philosophers propagated out into the institutions like the schools and whatnot, and that's how they've been kind of convincing the normies, right? They've kind of been just passing down this philosophy to the normies. So fundamentally, I think our task is to convince these philosophers, right, these thought leaders, and you know, pass on our philosophy to them. And, you know, so if I don't think you should be too concerned, maybe concerned is the wrong word, too scared by this massive mountain of socialism, because that's not, overcoming that isn't the task, right? We don't need to go in and convince every, you know, normie to vote for Ron Paul, because that's not really the fundamental task. I think the fundamental task is convincing the remnant, and it'll come downstream from there that these normies will kind of accept our philosophy implicitly without really, you know, they might not directly question it, but they'll it'll just be passed down to them essentially.
I will add on to
social
that.
consciousness sense.
Like, things can change a lot faster than most people realize. Like, let's take the example of the Soviet Union. Lenin had a minority of political power in the Soviet Union, and he took that minority of political power and used it. Sorry, not the Soviet Union, the pre-Soviet Union. He used that minority of political power that he had and turned it into taking control of the largest country on earth. And that happened very quickly in the span of single people's lifetimes. That occurred. If you think about our movement, where did we really start? Well, we started with about a dozen or so people in Murray Rothbard's living room 60 odd years ago. And now it is constantly being talked about. Constantly, politicians, especially in America, are trying to kowtow to the libertarians at election time. They're saying, okay, libertarians, of course we love the libertarians. You always hear this type of thing. It took us 60 years to get from a dozen people in Murray Rothbard's living room to the president of Argentina actively saying that he is a supporter of some of these beliefs. That is an extraordinary trajectory, if you think about it. Think of what we can achieve in another 60 years after that, and another 60 years after that, and so on and so forth. Like, if you think about it, the progressives, the leftists, they're just kind of running on inertia at this point. They already won the philosophical argument quite some time ago, and we're seeing them slowly decline over the years. People are taking them less seriously as time goes on, and they need a new great man, in effect, to revive the philosophy. They need their third Plato, second Plato, of course, being Immanuel Kant. They need a new figure like that in order to respond to the Aristotelian Ayn Rand, or else they just are destined to fail. That's just how it goes.
Well, it's the midwit. It's in the colleges, especially. It's the midwits that they prey on, and that's what I'm thinking about. It's the people who can take. It's the people that can take in information, but can't really think for themselves. That's what I've noticed. In
well, it's worth noting on that description, those people aren't thinking for themselves. We describe these people as normies, right? What is the defining trait of the normie? They follow the norms. Okay, so who produces those norms? The philosophers. So all we've got to do is win over the class of philosophers. Class, in quotations. And you do that by having the correct arguments. In fact, the current philosophy establishment, this is how broken it is. A lot of them don't even consider Ayn Rand a philosopher in the first place. So of course they're not going to give any sort of proper refutation of her ideas. And if they're not going to do that, then they're doomed. They're quite frankly doomed. They will not be able to keep convincing people. And so, the people who matter, that is. And so, then what happens to all these downstream people? Well, they just adopt the new philosophy of the day. They're followers. They're not thinkers. They're sheep. We just need to control the you. EWE. We control the you, and then everything follows from that.
Well, like you said, they're sheep, aren't they? And so they're bound to stick together. Like, to me, when I look in society, there are outcasts, there are normies, and then there are the conformists, the people who are outwardly trying to prove themselves to the postmodern, I suppose, neo-Marxist narrative that we've created in these institutions. And if you look at them, they are all one. There is no individuality there whatsoever. So I'm just wondering, like, how we can convince these people, or maybe how do we even convince them when they've been programmed to be orientated around a collectivist narrative.
Well, so the fundamental insight of Albert J. Nock in his essay Isaiah's Job is that it's in fact not important to convince those people. Those people are entirely unimportant to convince. You don't want to be doing the job of the shepherd who is constantly trying to herd the sheep over to your side. And if you miss a couple, then they just get herded over by somebody else. Let the communists do the herding. We don't care about that. Let them spend all their energy on doing that. What is important is he highlights this through the story of the prophet Isaiah. What did the prophet Isaiah do? All he did was he stood up there on the step each day, and he just spoke the message. He said, "The end is coming," or whatever the fuck it is that it is in the story, and God tells him, "Well, gather this remnant. Just say the message each day. You'll gather a certain remnant." He's like, "You fucking idiot! There's a remnant out there, Isaiah. You're going to gather this remnant, and they can be saved." And indeed, the masses, most people, they'll boo him, they'll make fun of him. Doesn't matter. Just say the message. And you can get a very clear example of this actually happening with the Ron Paul campaign. I recommend you look into some of these interviews they do of Ron Paul on TV, of him just being utterly based, and the people will literally get up out of their chairs to go scream and go like, how dare you? You know, I think some guy was like, came up and he was like, well, Mr. Paul or Dr. Paul or whatever. What about people who shouldn't the government come in and stop you from doing drugs? And he's like, well, I mean, you're a little fat. Why don't the government come in and stop you from being so fat? Everybody hated that. That is Isaiah's job. That is the Isaiah's job strategy. Is to just say these controversial, radical ideas without apology. And you gather the people who are important, the thinkers. You gather those people. They respect that because they also don't like the normies.
Yeah, I feel like in the institutions, like when I was looking at university, it's that it feels like it's just so full of people who are just ready to take on board Marxist ideas, and that it just kind of puts you off. So I don't really know where the other critical thinkers are. I can just, well, I suppose the only real source is here, the internet. But it seems like they've all kind of scattered, mainly because we've just been, driven off because the institutions, they're no longer, for critical thinking.
If I can offer something that perhaps will be useful to you, I've been through university myself. I have a degree, and I had the same experience that you're describing. I mean, anyone who's a regular viewer here knows that I have no shortage of stories about how some of the persecution I faced was basically comedic levels of just ridiculous things. And I want you to know that I found that university absolutely 100% was just a completely irredeemable cesspool. It was just, words would not adequately describe how bad it was. Yet, ever since I've left university, I've found the world to be much more open to libertarianism and, things like the non-aggression principle. I think the university wants to suck you in a little bit. I mean, if you think about it, maybe you didn't have this experience, but when I was growing up and I was still a child, I was often under the impression the entire time that there was nothing in the world except getting into university. All the jobs were on the other side of going to university. The whole point of getting up in the morning was to get to good grades so you could go to university. That's what the school I was in was constantly telling me. There's a lot of pressures that try to make you think subconsciously, explicitly, subtly, that university is really, really important. It actually isn't. There are a bunch of parasites. I feel like a cliche for saying that, but like almost everybody you meet in university is somebody whose whole world is to justify grants so that they can continue to live off grants. That's all that they do. I had many professors tell me, I had one professor in particular tell me in no uncertain terms that despite being a scientist, his purpose was not to discover anything about the real world. His purpose was to produce works that would facilitate more government expenses on minorities. That was what his role was as a professor in his eyes. Now, for him, he didn't mean racial minorities. He meant marginalized people in a psychological sense. So, like neurodivergent people, which is equally as bad in my mind. But despite all those pressures that are out there to try and make you think that university is very important, I just don't think that it is. I think I've made much more money. I've been much more productive. I've had a much better life ever since I wasn't involved in university. And of course, if you are trying to be in a career path where you have to be in university, then that's a little bit tougher for you. That's a pill that you may have no choice but to swallow. But I think that even if you're going to be forced to go through the university, you should remain grounded in the idea that the university is not as important as they want you to think, and that the broader world out there is full of people who prefer cooperation over coercion and are very amenable to the ideas of libertarianism. I feel like my voice is going there. Before we go here, we're going to have to tie it up soon. I certainly want to give my co-host the opportunity to say a little bit more on this. But I found it a little bit difficult to narrow down a specific concern. I wonder, Lewis, if you would help me out here, could you summarize what the concern is so that we might try to offer you something that's very, A to B, your concern, and we can give you a response that applies directly to something specific?
Yeah, sure. So how do we get spread the word of anarcho-capitalism to actually make this happen with knowing that all the institutions are basically out there to destroy it?
Well, I mean, how did you learn about it? Presumably you saw about it on social media, somebody posting about it. That's what we got to do. We just got to keep doing that. It's something Adrian told me. He was mentioned before. He's the Springtime of Nations guy. He told me before I came around, the general perception within libertarianism was, oh, they're an objectivist. They're probably just some sort of war hawk or something. Until I come around, and that perception is flipped. It is possible for a person to come along and flip these perceptions without, an enormous amount of like funding or, working themselves to the bone necessarily. It is possible for that perception to flip. That is how we can do this. We can just actually push this philosophy, which is the most beautiful philosophy ever created. And people want to hear that type of message. They really do. At least the people who matter do.
So if these libertarian parties get, say, more and more big and people get more and more attracted to them, do people just increasingly see the state as utterly redundant, and more and more people just choose to, I don't know, not pay tax or something like that? Is that how it?
Or even just, in order to protect itself, the state will have to relent and provide increasing levels of liberalization. Now, the particular steps, they're kind of secondary for us. What is fundamental is this preaching of the message. If you just keep doing that, then eventually the society you want happens, assuming you're correct in your message.
Let's take it to Anarcho-Econ and Floppa for some closing remarks.
Well, with respect to this kind of question of like, how do you almost find the remnant? I'm actually going to commit a crime and ask a question on top of this, because as a content creator myself, I'm lucky enough to have 3 fellow content creators in this call with me. I sometimes struggle thinking, what kind of videos should I be producing to find the right people? And so I almost want to ask anyone who wants to chime in, what kind of topics do you think we should be addressing? What kind of content should we be making? Just any general thoughts on that kind of thing, because I'm kind of with Lewis on this one. I mean, obviously I have a lot of white pill hope for the future, but I'm kind of uncertain on exactly what the method we should go about is.
So if I could field that, I'm a big proponent of specialization. You should focus on those topics that are most of interest to you, because then you're going to present them in the best possible way. And more broadly, like for instance, I decided that I wanted to start targeting more heavily people who watch YouTube on their TV, because the ad revenue bonuses are like, if you're on your TV, you're far less likely to be swiping away, you know. So I started trying to edit around targeting those people in particular. And you can do the same for philosophy. If you just make the best videos you can make on the topics that are most of interest to you and try to get your arguments as tight as possible, then there's this beautiful thing called the YouTube algorithm. It's going to figure out who will resonate with that, and it will send them to you. Like you can kind of just lay back and let it happen. You know, if people click on your video and watch it, YouTube's going to recognize that, and they're going to send it out. Of course, I'm preaching to the choir here. You'll be definitely aware of how that stuff works. But you know, just for the audience in general.
I've been a full-time YouTuber myself. I don't mean this project. I mean, I've actually been somebody who's making a full-time income doing YouTube. One thing I think that's supplemental to that needs to be very strongly considered is you need to do something that you can sustainably do, because the money won't keep you doing it. You need to make sure that you preserve your enjoyment of the topic with a great deal of care, because it's very easy to find yourself rapidly burning out. And then you could have the best strategy in the world, but if you burn out, it's for nothing. It'll do you no good. So I think that that's something that you should be mindful.
By the way,
of
have you ever revealed what your other channel was?
Only to other content creators. I never publicly
Yeah.
did. It's easier for me that way.
It's a great channel.
Thank you.
But
I
yeah,
hope you find that useful.
Yeah,
Oh, but what I was
sorry. My bad.
Yeah, I think we all can agree here that like institutional opposition in general is like a big problem. But I think one of the best things about the modern day is that we do have this now massive decentralized communication platform or platforms. And so I think ultimately our goal shouldn't be to, you know, win over these bad institutions, but to more or less reduce people's dependency on them by, you know, creating alternatives to them. So ultimately it would make the existing institutions more obsolete over time. That may not be the best way to phrase that, but I would be interested in at least one other person's thoughts here on that.
I was just going to say, I mean, especially if you live in the UK, I'd say secondary schools, basically high schools, they are basically fascist institutions. You know, they do not care about the individual student at all. I mean, they even have their own minister of propaganda, you know, head of DEI. And, you know, I've been suspended and even excluded for many occasions, you know, simply, you know, speaking out against it. I remember there was this one teacher who said, oh, in Marxist countries, there's no suffering. She literally said that and then went on to the next line. And I was there having severe, like, you know, my brain was, I felt like, you know, I was in some kind of trance because I thought, oh, this can't be real. And then I challenged her on it and said, oh, you can't challenge me on this. You know, apparently I was doing it in a rude way. Then I got sent out. I may have said something
apparently
about
ruder than advocating the death of all of the bourgeoisie. Apparently ruder than that.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, I have to say we've got a surprise. Another socialist is calling into the show, so we really have to move on because we're at the capstone here. We're going to do a surprise little extension. It'll be an interesting one, I promise. Lewis, thanks so much for calling in with this. It's been an interesting chat. I hope that we can hear back from you soon, and hopefully you'll join the Discord and let us know if you're finding that you're navigating the situation with some efficiency. Of course, if you ever need any further, you want to talk to any of us about this, you can always reach us on Discord. We're all very available. But we're going to call it for here. Would you like to have the last word, Lewis, before we move on?
Yeah, thank you so much for happening. Thank you so much for having me. And Flopper, I love you, man. Keep up the great
Thanks.
work. I hope you can. Are you going to do that debate with a King Critical?
Yes, yeah. I'll just say it, yeah. I won't be not transparent about it, but I hope to.
Yeah,
if he agrees. I'm pretty sure he has.
Good. That'll sure be some entertainment. Anyway,
hopefully we
bye.
can get him on here. we'll host
Yeah,
it on
true.
this channel. That'd be fantastic. All right, Lewis, thanks so much. We
Bye.
all hope that we can hear from you again soon. Best of luck. We'll keep in touch.
Thank you. Bye.
Goodbye, sir. All right, guys. Sorry, it's our final call. If you're in the queue and you're not the next person, you're out of luck. But we've got one more call coming up here. This is Kunbala. Listen, I'm not saying that right, but I'll call you Q. We can't see you. Well, actually, Zulu and I can see you, but the viewers at home can't see you. But can we hear you?
I can also see him. I don't have like
Oh,
admin access.
only me. Only I can see you. All right. I can sort of hear you. Try again.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Perfect. Definitely good enough. All right. So, for the sake of expediency, you're calling in. You can ask us a question. You can offer us a challenge. I'll try to take a bit of a step back this time and let our co-hosts do most of the answering. The floor is yours, Kunvala. Why don't you tell us what you're calling in about, what your challenge is, what your question is, and we'll give the floor to our co-hosts.
Okay, so do you guys think colonialism is illegal in your ideology?
All right. That's a great one. Floppa, you want to take it away?
Sorry, I was having trouble finding the mute button. I believe so, yeah. Because it requires like the dispossession of other people. So, I mean, do you want to elaborate on the question more, or so my answer is just no, I guess.
I believe communism
yes, it is illegal.
colonialism is an example of things that capitalism would advocate, despite it being a form of aggression, because of when you have like a free market within your jurisprudence and you have competitors, it would be in your interest to do that colonialism, to take your private army somewhere and have access to cheaper labor and resources by force.
If I could jump in here. Oh, sorry. You go ahead. If you were.
No. Oops. Sorry.
No,
For some reason, my computer's bugging out. I'll let you do it.
It's a sign that you're right, Kumbala, because clearly all four of us are just jumping through the gate at the same time to talk about colonialism.
I would say now this perspective might differ from some of my co-hosts, depending on how they're interpreting the history of it. I think colonialism has been unfairly maligned in large part. It is, for the most part, an exportation of capitalism to these regions. Now, there were certainly colonial abuses that occurred, but for the most part, it was a massive improvement over what came before it. And you can see this by the fact that when it stopped, well, is Zimbabwe really better than Rhodesia? Is that what we're to believe? That it would be better to be in Zimbabwe than Rhodesia? I don't think so. I don't think that's true. I think a lot of the hatred of colonialism is
example.
white people.
Something that I want to hand this over to Anarcho-Econ, so brace yourself. But I want to give you this as a sort of transition. One of the great strengths of anarcho-capitalism, of Austrian economics, of individualism as a methodology, is that we are under no obligation to accept a package deal. And certainly, I don't think we will. So colonialism's a single word, but it encapsulates a huge concept. Now, an entire historical event, nobody in their right minds, and I mean this, no sane person is going to say, ah, yes, well, I agree with every single thing that happened between the years 1650 and 1899.
Well,
That
I
doesn't make
specifically
any
mean
sense.
the part of it that would violate the non-aggression principle.
Precisely. So the number one thing about ANCAPs that's more essential than anything else is that we're against violations of the non-aggression principle. So if you take any colonial enterprise and you say, okay, well, we came, there's this ship came ashore and killed a bunch of people, and then traded freely with other people. Well, we're against the first thing and we're for the second thing, but we won't accept it as a package deal. Now, Anarcho-Econ, I've given my transition. I'd like you to have the floor for a moment.
I was asking
Oh, sorry.
I was asking about capitalism incentivizing it, regardless of its ethics. I know that it's already like you're against it, you're against the aggression, but I'm speaking in terms of does not capitalism incentivize this?
So if we're moving the claim to specifically, would there be these massive, like, I don't know, takeovers of land by big corporations or something like that? Well, I mean, there's a couple of cases we can look at. Let's take two big corporations. One tries to take over the other. That strikes me as massively unprofitable because they're going to have to go to war or something like that, and that's going to completely destroy the capital structure of essentially both firms. Now, if you have a massive firm and they want to take over, this massive firm, they have a complete control over like everything in a given area or something, and there's like this little, itsy bitsy guy, then maybe the massive firm can take it over. But that doesn't really establish anything meaningfully against ANCAP because it would apply equally to, a state. A massive United States could take over a tiny country essentially in a day if they wanted to, just nuke them to death. But if we're talking about, what is incentivized, by the market, well, certainly the incentive, if everyone's being rational, is to engage in non-aggression because of mutual profit. So if you have two parties trading with each other, they both
that actually apply outside of their shared jurisdiction.
I'm not sure what you meant by outside of the jurisdiction.
Let's say you're in a jurisdiction where you're all ANCAPs, you're all like you don't have a state, so you all have access to private armies, you all have access to defend yourself. So of course it's unprofitable to fight each other over resources, but because of competition, you want to have special access to some resources somewhere or to some labor somewhere. So someone could take an army and race to areas that are unable to defend themselves, and take that area for yourself to have exclusive access to some kind of resource or to have like a cheap access to some kind of resource.
Let me jump in there really quick, Anarcho-Econ, if I can.
Sure.
The thing you got to understand about, you're asking about capitalism, but I want everyone to understand that we're advocates for anarcho-capitalism specifically. So private property is why we are including the word capitalism in our label. That's what we're using to communicate about ourselves. But private property is a requirement for the free society, but it is not sufficient. So it's not enough to have private property that now you're in the world that we're advocating for. Certainly, there's no doubt, and I don't think there should be any doubt from anyone on the panel here, you can have a society that has private property and still has a terrible philosophy. That's fine for us because we're not trying to achieve merely that there is private property. So if it were to be the case, let's say hypothetically, that a society that just has private property but has any philosophy to go along with it could be bad. The people in that society could do bad things. Absolutely, it could be. But it poses no threat whatsoever to anarcho-capitalism because we are not merely advocating for private property. We're advocating for something more than that. We simply recognize that private property is one of the many requirements for that. So it is no criticism to us to notice that people who have private property can do bad things. Zulu, what do you think about that?
Yeah, so the Ancap claim in particular is just about the legal side, but there is a broader moral aspect to it as well. And yet, so on this question of colonialism, well, I mean, we are able to compartmentalize and go, well, to the extent that it's aggression, we're of course against it. I think that's about as clear an answer you can get. Is colonialism a crime? Well, the parts that are crimes, you know. The parts that aren't crimes are not crimes.
Back to you, Q.
And how does your society disincentivize it?
How does our society disincentivize crime?
Yeah. So what is our society as you perceive it? Because our society is not just whenever people have private property. Our society is a society that has the non-aggression principle. So in the very first place, you're asking this question about people who see aggression as wrong in the first place. So what could be a bigger disincentive to aggression?
You can have, for example, like a Christian society, but it's full of people who don't abide by Christianity because they were incentivized to not do that. You know, if not everyone would follow the principles
Would it be
they
a
plan to
Christian
follow.
society?
So you have,
Like, I mean,
so you have
our
a society
advocacy
that
would be
agrees to
that if somebody
abide by
tries
a
aggressing
specific
against your property,
not
I mean, it's your right to shoot them in the head until they can no longer aggress against your property. I mean, that's the answer there.
Yes, but because of the competition in the market between you and your competitors, for example, at some point, a person who would cheat, who would do a crime to succeed in that competition, will be ahead because of this, and that's my point.
You can't be ahead if you no longer have a head, right? If we execute you and take your head off, then you can no longer be ahead.
Am I understanding correctly that you're under the impression that the people who are advocating for a free society haven't considered that people are going to cheat?
No, I know that you considered it, but what are the? I'm curious about your suggestions of how to deal with that specifically.
So if you have an apple on your desk and you own it and somebody takes the apple from you, you are justified in doing whatever's necessary to get that apple back. And if you're playing, if you enter into any kind of contract, whether it's a card game or it's a casino slot machine or whatever it is, and the contract you discover was entered into under false pretenses, then it's the exact same thing. You never exchanged what you gave up because you gave it up on conditions that were never met. Like, for example, if I give Zulu an orange in return for an apple, and I bite into the apple to discover that it's just styrofoam painted red, then I never gave him the orange because the condition of the orange was that I was getting an apple in return, which was never satisfied. So he's got my orange over there, and I can go get that orange back because it's mine. To ask a question about cheating in a sort of general sense, it's the same thing. When somebody cheats at something, then there is clearly an aggression taking place. Somebody is taking control of a scarce thing that's not theirs, and the non-aggression principle, the legal framework that we're offering, has a very clear approach to this. You can be justified doing whatever is necessary to get it back. Now, so for example, let's compare that to the statist reality that we live in right now. If somebody burgles my house, well, right off the bat, they know that I can't defend myself because I'm not allowed to own any implements that I could defend myself with. Moreover, anything that I use to defend myself, this is Canada for anyone who's curious. If I were to grab a knife, for example, and stab an intruder with the knife, well, I've still committed a federal crime because I've used something in a means to hurt somebody, even though that's not its intended purpose. So not only can I not have explicit weapons, I can't even make use of things in a weapon way. That's what happens. So I have to wait now. I have to wait for the police to arrive. Except where I live, the police are going to show up 45 minutes or later if they show up at all. So those are a bazillion incentives to be a burglar. because you know that people can't defend themselves. You know that help's not going to arrive. Those are incentives that promote burglary. Now, in a free society, I can shoot you in the face with a shotgun and kill you dead, which is a implement I would be very likely to possess. That sounds like a very strong disincentive to me. Floppa, what do you think about this? Does that sound like a society you'd want to be robbing houses in compared to the current one?
No, I definitely wouldn't want to commit any such trespassing on that society. But I would like to add that we're not against violence and totality. We're against unjust violence. So I advocate all the time that people do things to make themselves as competent as possible, to protect themselves in any way, so that we can build some type of cultural and social disincentive to commit crimes like this. So it's why I train in martial arts all the time, and I shoot a lot of guns. And yeah, so anarcho-econ, I guess.
That's part of why I was talking about jurisprudence. So I was saying you are cheating by colonizing people who can't defend themselves. So you can defend yourself. Other people in this jurisdiction can defend themselves, but I can go to defenseless people and I will have an advantage by colonizing them. So what would the society do to me in that case? What can they do to me without developing principle?
You seem to like this must be a quirk of being a statist. I don't mean that in a condescending way, but you keep referring to this jurisprudence. We don't apply.
I mean,
the
like
NAP.
the reason where you all have your you don't have your state, but you have your principles.
I know what you mean. The NAP is not applied by fiat. The NAP is not applied by like me and Zulu have the NAP, but Floppa just doesn't have it yet. No, everybody on Earth is a human being, and everybody on Earth has the same rights. So if you it's in my interest to trade with the people from Africa. It's in my interest to trade with the people from Southeast Asia. It's in the interest of the companies around me. It's in everybody's interest. And so if you live in a world with people who actually understand social cooperation, which hopefully we're heading in that direction, you already benefit. This is how Milton Friedman, who I don't even consider an Ancap, but Milton Friedman has the wonderful presentation on the pencil. Think about how many people all over the world have to cooperate. People, like he says, who might hate each other if they knew each other in real life, but it doesn't matter. We're all cooperating to make the world a better place. We're using economics. We're using the price mechanism, right? Now, that's the incentive that's natural to human beings. And if you have some thieves, it doesn't matter if they're robbing people in Africa, because you're saying, well, there's this power imbalance. Yes, of course, there's always going to be a power imbalance where you have somebody exploiting somebody else using force. But what's happening here is in our society, everybody's going to recognize, hey, those are the people who mine our gold. Those are the people who build what are they called? The ferrules for my pencils, right? That's where my graphite comes from. And the local people around there, they'll defend themselves. You're not going to trade with a container ship comes to your shipping terminal, says, hey, we're here with all of our plundered goods from Africa. First of all, no one's going to insure that tanker. Second of all, the fact that it's stolen means that any person would be justified in returning it to its original owner, and nobody would be justified in purchasing it. Right, Zulu? I mean, I want you to jump in here, Zulu, and help me out here. But it seems to me like the only way you could get to where you're at here is to make the assumption that you keep saying jurisprudence, like you don't realize that the natural state of human beings is cooperation.
Yes.
What do you think, Zulu? Did I capture it correctly there?
Yeah.
In practice, at least you will start somewhere without a state. You wouldn't have this cooperation everywhere at all times.
You're completely, I hate to cut you off, but you're completely missing my point, because I already, my answer takes into account already that there could be an Ancap society in one place, but not everywhere. That is what I was responding to already.
Your response was that there is they don't get insurance, they maybe lose.
No, that's the very last thing I said.
Yeah, so what would they lose if they took the access everyone else has? If they say I homesteaded Congo right now, I just killed its people and I homesteaded it.
Zulu, my answer was in vain. I'd like to see if you might have better
And so
luck.
let me think about the rational incentives here. You know, we're all rational people and we're talking about incentives. Let's say my business plan is that I'm going to kill off and destroy the people who are producing the goods that I'm then taking to the world, right, to the civilized world. That strikes me as a very non-sustainable business practice, right? And it should to anybody who
just as they
purchases from me, right? Why would I rationally want to purchase from somebody who is stealing from other people who produce those things? Because then it's making sure that that production is less capable of going forth, right? I'm going to get it's going to be much better for everybody in the long run if those people are not robbed, because then the production can actually continue.
I don't know. I mean, the colonists were able to sell their stuff just right. They didn't have this issue. Why do you think that?
Sure, and it was to the extent that was happening, it was an irrational system and not what we're advocating for. Like, it wasn't Ancap back in those days, you know?
So was the issue that they weren't rational, or that they were not materially like relevant to them, where the stuff came from?
Well, the issue was that they weren't rational, that they were to some extent thieving.
So
in proposing a superior alignment of incentives, we're not suggesting that nobody like the incentives that take place are not supposed to imply that, oh, well, the incentives are better, so no one will ever be a burglar. I mean, you're going to have people burglarizing homes, even if they're rich and the home that they're burglarizing is full of traps and firearms, because some people are just crazy. And they're going to do it for the rush. Some people are just bad, and they're going to do it because they're evil. When we're talking about an improvement in the incentives, it doesn't do any harm to us or our
there's
worldview.
a substantial enterprise. Like there's a substantial.
Hold on, only one of us can talk at a time. It doesn't do any harm for what we're advocating for to suggest that. Well, look, somebody has stolen before. Of course, there's always going to be stealing. We have to ask ourselves very carefully, well, what is the implication of that? Does that mean that the incentives weren't maximized? Of course not. There's no implication there that causes trouble for what we're advocating for.
See, but what I was saying is the difference is, like, when you're a burglar and when you're a colonist, you have a different, like, you could say, cost-benefit analysis, right? And so, like, the benefit of the colonist is much bigger, and they can actually, like, benefit from it.
Anarcho-Econ, you want to chime in?
I mean, yeah.
I have an idea. Like, what if they just trade with irrational people? What if they just steal the stuff and they trade with irrational people, and they don't trade with rational people who are
Something I'll say is, aside from just a legal principle, I think a good way to understand the NAP is like the civilizational, attitude. Like, to the extent that people adopt the NAP and are rational, the corresponding society will be incredibly prosperous. So if people truly understand this, then they're going to understand that if I'm violating the NAP, I'm destroying some amount of production. I'm destroying some amount of wealth. And so if they are rational, then they won't want to do that. They won't want to steal from the irrational people, because they'd understand that even these irrational people can produce for them, and they can be traded with. So, if you just have someone who's really irrational, they might violate the NAP, but that would be a very bad decision on their part, right? So we're saying that's a bad decision, but it's not like some the NAP is going to like embody somebody and they're going to like stop them from aggressing or whatever. It's just that, if you're rational, then you will follow the NAP because you'll recognize that you'll be better off overall.
But how so? For the colonist individually, how would he be worse off when he's colonizing? as an
The
individual.
colonist is worse off because someone brought up in the YouTube comments, I think, tell them about comparative advantage, which is a very, pretty basic economic principle. I'm not sure exactly if you know about it, but, comparative advantage says that it's not necessarily best if you're controlling everything, right? It's not best if the colonizer goes in and controls everything because, the people there might actually be able to produce more efficiently than the colonizer. So it's not just about, it's a division of labor. The colonizers, like, I'm going to produce shoes, and the people over there that I could colonize, they're going to produce crops. And, it's not better if the colonizer is just producing everything.
Yeah, I think it's an example of context dropping. The context being dropped specifically is how did the prosperity come to be in the first place? It came to be because people were productive, because they were free. So if you're trying to reap those rewards, you're dropping the context of how those rewards came to be in the first place. That is why it is insufficient entirely in ethics to be a parasite.
Okay, but what if I just want the crops? Like you said, these other people can produce crops. What if I just force them
Again,
to
it's
produce
dropping the
crops?
context. Like saying I want is not ethics.
Well, it's not ethics because I'm not asking about ethics. I'm asking like, how do you materially prevent these people from dominating the
shoot them in the head.
market?
You kill them.
You shoot them in the head, right?
Isn't that an act of aggression against them?
No.
It'd
They
be
weren't
an
violating
act of defense.
Well, we got to
They're the ones trying to get you.
take a timeout here because this is, I think, I have long operated on the assumption that this is the single most, like, you got to understand this to talk to an Ancap or about Ancap. Okay, what is aggression? Aggression is the initiation of conflict. It's not just force. I believe Floppa said that just recently. One of my two co-hosts did. I know one of you guys was talking about
Yes.
this.
Yeah.
So it is not the case that violence is aggression. We're against aggression. We're not against violence. So when you attack somebody else, so let's say there's three people. There's person A, B, and C. If person A attacks person B, then they're aggressing not because they're doing violence, because they're starting it. If person B defends themselves, they're not doing an aggression. They're doing a violence, but they're not doing an aggression. If person C sees what's going on, pun intended, and intervenes to protect person B, he's also not doing an aggression. This isn't like worth quibbling over. This is the foundation of what Ancap is.
Yeah, okay, that actually answers the question. So if someone it turns out to be a colonist, I get to kill them, right?
Anybody who's doing, like, colonizing is a big word. Anybody who's doing aggression is
Like a
putting
violent
themselves.
colonist who shoots people in the head.
Yes, definitely. They're outside of the NAP. So not only are the people they're attacking justified in killing them, but everybody is.
Okay.
What we're making a case for is not that, aggressing on, or I think what you're trying to say is that even it may be, quote, better because the colonists have some type of clear advantage with the weaponry they have. So like, why wouldn't it be advantageous to just go and kill, I guess, the indigenous settlers or whatever? But what we're trying to say is that you would still have to prove that that's the case, and that working with them would be a worse alternative, is what I should say. Yeah. It goes back to the comparative advantage thing. And what we're saying is that our system incentivizes better alternatives or outcomes, and it's moral.
Yes. So, okay, here is the thing. We've established that if anyone commits aggression, anyone can retaliate against them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
So now, like, let's say this guy already has a private army and he sent it to Congo. So he already has the money to buy a private army that can commit aggression for him.
So all you're describing there, this is really simple. All you're describing there is people who are peacefully cooperating with each other. That's the people who follow the NAP versus an outside group that don't follow the NAP. That's all you're describing. And the simple answer to this, Zulu, jump in if you want to give. I know you know the spiel off the back of your hand here, or like the back of your hand. The people, like economic efficiency makes an extraordinary difference. And the free people are going to have every advantage to completely run circles around the aggressors. And if you want, I think Zulu would be happy to go over the specifics of why that is. But that question really is distilled into that simple fact. The question is just, how do people who follow the NAP defend themselves against groups of people who don't follow the NAP? The answer is it's just self-defense like normal. Insurance companies in particular are just an example of how we can organize that peacefully. I'm not saying it will be that way. I think it's probable. And the fact that our society is operating on the free market means that it would have every advantage in terms of efficiency. So hopefully that's a sufficient answer at face value.
Yes, fair enough. Cool. So I don't have any other question.
All right. Well,
Do you
thanks so
guys
much
have
for
any-
calling in. Before we go, I think you don't have to put up with this, but I'm really curious. I did a lot of talking. I'm wondering, maybe some of my co-hosts would like to ask you a question, or maybe there's something that they feel was unsaid that should that they'd like to get off their chest. Econ or Floppa?
I mean, I feel like everything was said. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
I just want to ask where you're from in terms of the accent. I know it's not like relevant, but I'm just curious.
I am from Egypt.
Oh, that's super cool.
Very nice. Okay.
Another example of a great colonial project, the Suez Canal, not built by the Egyptians, stolen by the Egyptians.
Dirty Zulu. Dirty Zulu. All right. Well, thanks so much for calling in, Kumbilla. Everybody who's watching the stream, this should be recorded for all posterity. I've been giving Mr. Q a hard time for not calling in. And now that he has called in, I'm permanently deprived. I can no longer give him a hard time about it. So this is a grievous injury to my personal enjoyment, but I'm very glad that they did. Q, if you like, you can have the last word before we sign off for the night.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here. Thrilled to be here. I should call in later if I have the chance or something. I probably have more. I probably have better arguments or better questions or something.
Well, we would be very excited to hear from you, so we completely encourage it. If you give us a heads up, we'll try to accommodate you in any way that we can. We love to hear from non-Ancaps very much. So I guess we'll call it there. That was Kunbula. Thanks so much for calling in. We'll just do some quick housekeeping, everybody. So this was a 3.5 hour long live stream. Thanks so much to all my co-hosts for staying around for this long. That's crazy. And these were some record numbers as well on our viewership. So thanks everyone for tuning in. It was super, super appreciated. We actually had tons of callers who didn't get on today. So hopefully that bodes well for future calls, that we'll be able to get them on and just have a healthy rotation going forward. I love answering the text questions, but the calls are just so much more fun. Now, everybody knows the normal co-host here, Liquid Zulu, above me. His channel's always linked in the description, but we have two special co-hosts today. Thanks so much for you both being here. Your channels are both linked in the description again. So if you guys want to follow our co-hosts, you should do so. You should do so. It's in the description just below. That's Based If True. That was our friend Floppa answering questions. And besides Based If True was Anarcho Econ. Both channels are linked in the description below. Here, I'll go through both of you right quick. Floppa, if you want to just quickly say, if there's anywhere else you'd like to direct people, or if you'd like to say anything else about your channel.
Yeah, I just want to say that I greatly appreciate you guys having me on, and I'm totally down to do it again. And I made a big mistake. I didn't make a post that I was going to be here. So hopefully I can bring in a much bigger audience if you do decide to have me again. But I will definitely recommend your show. Your show's awesome. It's one of the pivotal moments of me being, becoming Ancap. And Anarcho Econ, I just met him recently. So it's very interesting that, just happen to be on the show together today. So everyone here has an awesome platform. Highly recommend. Zulu has an extremely well condensed, courses on any questions you guys have. Zail Zulu, and I'll pass it off to Anarcho Econ.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say I had a lot of fun on this. I didn't know it was going to run for 3 hours, but I'm happy it did. We had a lot of cool questions, and of course, thank you guys so much for having me on. I really appreciate the opportunity to collaborate with you guys and whatnot. More content coming soon if you're interested. And last thing I'll say is if you're interested in my Twitter, it's at Anarcho Econ. But yeah, thank you guys so much for having me on. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Floppa. It's really bodes well for us that you didn't put a shout out because we had such good numbers. I actually had subconsciously kind of assumed that you did because of the numbers we pulled. So one can only assume the new records will reach after this. And I want everyone to know I'm a big fan of active communities. I don't mean you guys. I mean the content creators. If you've been following many communities on YouTube, they come and they go quickly. These content creators that we've got on as co-hosts today, they're very active. They're posting a lot of stuff. They're embroiled in the drama today. So get in there and make hay while the sun is shining, as they say. Zulu, before we log off, I'd like you to have the last word.
Yeah, thank you, everybody who came on. Thank you to our guest hosts. It was a great showing. Thank you to everybody who watched the stream, especially to those who donated. And also thank you to all the callers. I think it was a great showing. I suppose what's our big next milestone? When do we get ad revenue on the channel? I suppose is that like 1,000 subs?
I think it's a 5,000. It's either 2,000 or 5,000. I can check really quickly. It says 1,000. Yep, 1,000.
There you go. Brilliant. So let's smash that really just degrade that subscribe button. Kill
Consume the capital.
Aggress against that subscribe button.
Zail Zulu, Yo Galazar, Aol Econ.
All right, and one final note for the people still here. We are doing these on Sundays for the time being. This will persist for the foreseeable future, and we appreciate everybody dealing with the change in schedule. Until next week, thanks so much, everybody. We're looking forward to seeing you again in 7 days.